Dr. David Hogbin became a hero when he saved the life of his wife in one of Australia's crocodile-infested rivers. But tragedy was about to befall the family in the most heart-wrenching way imaginable. Hit like and subscribe. This is Fierce. 40-year-old Dr. David Hogbin and his wife of 10 years, Jane, were both GPs living in Newcastle in New South Wales, Australia. They had 3 sons, aged 7, 5, and 2. In August 2024, the young family were on a 4-wheel drive camping holiday with some of Jane's family. They had taken their vehicle along the Queensland coast. The trip was full of adventure, settling down under night skies full of stars, cooking in the open bush, stopping off for dips and waterholes, and admiring the beautiful scenery along the way. They had even made it to and posed for a photo together at Cape York, the northernmost point of the Australian continent. It was the kind of adventure that David loved, being in the great outdoors with his loving family. But their trip was about to come to a tragic and life-changing end. Along one of their many walks, the young family followed a well-trodden footpath along the Annan River, just outside Cooktown. It was Saturday, August 3, 2024. David and Jane were acutely aware of the dangers that lie in Australian rivers. They never strayed too close to the water's edge and always kept their children at a safe distance. David was fiercely protective of his family. The established path they were following ran alongside the river around 5 meters or 16 feet above the waterline. This was out of reach of any potential danger that could be lurking in the murky water below. It was a glorious day, but there had been recent heavy rains which had weakened the riverbank and the path that David and his family were now walking along. Although most Australian rivers are considered dangerous due to the potential threat of crocodiles, this stretch of river wasn't the ideal hunting ground for the prehistoric reptiles. The bank was too high for the likes of wallabies to wander down to the river for a drink, and crocodiles wouldn't be able to leap high enough out of the water to take anything walking along the footpath. But unbeknownst to David and his family, people had regularly thrown fish scraps into the river, watching in delight as the crocodiles emerged, swirling in the water before disappearing from sight. The crocodiles had now learned that this section of the river would provide them with an easy meal. They had also learned to associate people with food. The path David had been walking on suddenly gave way. The riverbank had caved in beneath his feet. He was sent sliding down the riverbank, scraping himself as he slid over the rough terrain, and in a matter of seconds, he landed in the river. The cold water took his breath away, and he immediately scrambled to get himself out. In the desperate seconds that followed, Jane rushed forward along the footpath, pushing past her children and the other family members. She slid down the bank to her husband and immediately reached out. But just yards away, the splash had been noticed by something else. A 5-meter, 16-foot crocodile slowly swam toward the commotion. David and Jane hadn't seen it, but they knew that David was in serious danger, and they needed to get him out of the water quickly. Just a second later, the crocodile launched its attack, and David felt the crushing sensation of its powerful jaws around his wrist. In a split second, the father of 3 made the heroic decision to let go of his wife's arm. She was his only lifeline in those horrifying moments, but he knew that she would be pulled into the water if he didn't let go. He couldn't bear the thought of his 3 young boys growing up without parents. As he let go, the crocodile dragged him underwater. Jane screamed and watched in horror as David disappeared into the murky green-brown water. With the strongest bite force in the animal kingdom, there was no way David was getting out of its vice-like grip without some kind of miracle. He would have tried to fight back, trying to reach for the crocodile's vulnerabilities, like its eyes and tip of its snout. But fighting for breath at the same time, disoriented and in shock, his fight would have been short-lived. There was a swirl, a slight splash for the enormous animal's tail, and then all was still. It was as if nothing had happened. There was no continued struggle. There was no commotion, no reappearance of Jane's husband. In an instant, David was gone, and Jane had to climb back up the bank to explain what had happened to her 7, 5, and 2-year-old sons. In an instant, their lives had changed forever. Emergency services were scrambled to the Annan River Bridge just after 2 p.m. that afternoon. But there was nothing they could do. David was gone. A search ensued, looking for any trace of the much-loved family man. News spread of David's final selfless act to save his wife. It was an act that resonated with his family and friends. It was the kind of man he was, a genuinely kind-hearted soul who touched so many lives. What followed was an agonizing 2 days while the search for the crocodile and David continued along that stretch of river. The family was in shock and they were in mourning. The incredible family holiday that they had been planning for months before had ended in the worst way imaginable. A huge crocodile was found on a Monday evening 2 days after David was taken. It was found in a creek 2.5 miles from where David had been taken and was killed. Human remains were found inside. It appeared that the authorities had caught the animal responsible for David's death, but DNA analysis would have to confirm it. Within 2 days of a GoFundMe page being set up, more than $110,000 had been raised, a testament to how well-liked David was. Following the tragedy, rumors spread about the attack. People believed that David was fishing too close to the riverbank when he was taken. His wife Jane spoke out about what happened to clear up the misinformation that was being spread and to warn others about the dangerous stretch of river. But most of all, she wanted people to know about David. Someone didn't just get killed by a crocodile, Jane said. We have lost a wonderful husband, father, son, brother, friend, and doctor. She reiterated the fact that David and the family weren't doing anything wrong. He was just walking around a corner on a well-worn path. It was just one of those random accidents that happened, and nothing could have been done to prevent. One tiny consolation for Jane was the fact that whilst their young boys were close, they didn't actually see the attack. And if she had been pulled into the water as well, then the whole situation could have been 1,000,000 times worse for the boys and the rest of the family. Jane's family and friends have spoken about how incredibly kind David was, and in his final few years, he had been the happiest he had ever been in his entire life. He always jokingly offered to be a stay-at-home dad and never work again because his children were his #1 priority. His boys will grow up remembering their father and all the adventures they went on in the short time they had together. They will grow up knowing that their father was a hero, and only moments before he died, he couldn't have been happier. He was loving and loyal right to the very end. What began as a small petting zoo in the 1940s became one of the most popular tourist attractions in Israel. It's now a thriving zoo housing more than 2,000 animals and is renowned for its successful breeding of endangered and locally extinct species. With such a prestigious reputation, the zoo employs the most dedicated staff. They are highly skilled, highly trained, and completely devoted to the welfare of the animals. But on Sunday, August 18, 2024, the unthinkable happened. One of the most experienced zookeepers in the zoo was performing routine maintenance inside one of the enclosures. But this wasn't just any enclosure, this was the crocodile enclosure. The man has not yet been named, but we shall call him Yosef for the purposes of this video. Yosef was 45 years old and had devoted his entire adult life to the conservation of wildlife. He had followed his passion for animals that he had developed as a young boy and had worked as a zookeeper for 20 years. Working in Jerusalem Biblical Zoo was a dream job. He was surrounded by the animals he had been fascinated by since childhood, and his work was rewarded when he was given more responsibilities by the zoo managers and senior staff. Before the zoo opened, the staff began their duties. Enclosures needed cleaning, animals needed feeding, and food outlets needed stocking for the paying public. Yosef made his way to the crocodile enclosure. Tall metal fences surrounded a dried-out concrete hollow where crocodiles could swim when it was full of water. Green grass sprouted sparsely from the dusty brown perimeter that ran along the fence line. Visitors could view the crocodiles through large glass windows, watching as staff threw scraps of meat from wooden platforms that protruded into the enclosure. The feeding of the crocodiles always wowed the audience as they watched the reptile's impressive jaws snap closed with lightning-fast speed. That morning, Yosef stepped into the enclosure. The crocodiles were at the far end, nowhere near the experienced keeper. Yosef was tasked with mending a small section of the enclosure. Keeping his eyes on the animals at all times, Yosef knelt down to repair a small hole in the fencing. Work like this was routine, and he had performed it multiple times before. Rule number 1 was never take your eyes off the animals while inside their domain. But something happened that morning, something that distracted Yosef, and he broke the cardinal rule. He took his eyes off the crocodiles. Whatever it was, Yosef glanced away from the dried-up pond, letting his guard down in the most dangerous of locations. It only took a second, but it was a second that would change his life forever. He didn't notice one of the animals approaching him. It scuttled out of the dried-up concrete pond, silently and swiftly, rushing toward the unsuspecting keeper. Its head swayed from side to side as its short legs carried it across the ground. When Yosef lifted his head, it was too late. The crocodile lunged at him. It brought its jaws crashing down on Yosef's upper body. With a bite force of around 4,000 psi compared to our own of around 200 psi, the damage was incredible. Considered to have the strongest bite force in the animal kingdom, it's impossible to pry open a fully grown crocodile's jaws. But Yosef wasn't giving up that easily. He fought back, screaming and shouting for help as he did so. He tried to poke the animal in its eyes or bash it on the snout, but the attack was so ferocious, so rapid and dramatic that it was hard to comprehend what was going on. All Yosef could see was a whirlwind of green-brown scales, sharp white teeth, and thick, knobbly skin. It felt like an eternity, and no one came. He was all alone with one of the world's most lethal predators. But Yosef's colleagues had heard the commotion and ran to see what was going on. The scene they arrived at was one of horror. Their friend was underneath one of the crocodiles, wrestling for his life. With no way to stop the attack themselves, they immediately radioed through to the security guard. He jumped onto his motorcycle and raced to the crocodile enclosure. Tearing through the park, swerving along the walkways, he raced to the scene. Leaping off the bike, ripped his gun from his holster and raised it in front of him. Without hesitating, he took aim and fired at the crocodile. He had to be sure of his shot, a foot or two in either direction, and he could have easily shot Yosef. The crocodile reeled in pain as the bullets hit it. It immediately let go of its meal and scuttled away from him. The crack from the gun rang out across the zoo, alerting others that something was going on. Police were called and raced to the zoo entrance. Unclear messages about shots being fired in a possible crocodile attack came through from the station, but officers weren't sure what they would find when they arrived. Inside the enclosure, Yosef lay motionless on the dry, dusty ground. Blood pooled around his body. 2 of the crocodiles had been shot and recoiled a short distance away. Cautiously, emergency services and zoo staff made their way into the enclosure. Yosef, he was in a very bad way and barely breathing, but he was still alive. They lifted him out and into a waiting ambulance. He was rushed to the trauma unit at Hadassah Ein Kerem, just 10 minutes away, and straight into surgery. He was in a mess. The crocodile had bitten him repeatedly. With every snap of its jaws, the teeth had sliced through skin, muscle, and down to the bone. The crocodile had mostly devastated Yosef's upper body and face. In surgery, a team of anesthetists, oral and maxillofacial specialists, orthopedic and plastic surgeons worked on the 45-year-old for 9 hours. At the time of making this video, Yosef remained in critical condition, heavily sedated, ventilated, and in intensive care. His family and friends can only hope and pray for his full recovery. With Yosef out of the enclosure, the zoo's staff turned their attention to the crocodiles. The crocodile that had attacked Yosef had been struck multiple times by bullets. At first, it seemed like the damage to the enormous beast was minimal, but that night, its injuries became apparent. Despite the best efforts of Dr. Nili Evan-Megan, the veterinary director at the zoo, and the rest of the vet team. The crocodile died from its wounds. A second crocodile was injured by bullets, but is expected to make a full recovery. The whole shocking incident thankfully took place before the zoo opened to the public. Had paying guests been visiting at the time, the situation could have been worse. Not only was Yosef lucky that he had not been dragged into water, but it was lucky that the other crocodiles in the enclosure didn't join in the attack, leading to a feeding frenzy that would have almost certainly killed Yosef instantly. In April 2023, 65-year-old Kevin Darmody was on a fishing trip with his friends, one of whom was visiting from New South Wales. He owned the Peninsula Hotel in Laura, Queensland, Australia, and was well known in the community. His nickname was Stumpy due to his small stature, but he was a tough man who loved the outdoors and especially loved fishing. On Saturday, April 29, 2023, Kevin and his friends headed to the remote and rugged Ringiru, or Lakefield National Park. Set amongst 500,000 hectares, the park is teeming with wildlife, least of all, crocodiles. Visitors can explore in four-wheel drives, on foot, or in boats. When the friends arrived along the Kennedy River, they split up, each finding the perfect spot along the riverbank to settle down and cast their rods in. Straight away, Kevin spotted a small crocodile, but shooed it away. He threw some stones at it in the water, and it sank beneath the surface, disappearing into the murky river. The river is well known to be teeming with barramundi, the kind of fish the men were after. As Kevin began fishing, enjoying the peace and quiet of the great outdoors, he was unaware that he was being watched by a much larger crocodile. Just below the surface, hidden by the shadows of the overhanging trees, was an enormous saltwater crocodile. Its eyes popped up silently through the surface of the water, its nostrils barely making a ripple. Many people refuse to fish along that stretch of the river. If you drive past at night and shine a light, you will certainly see the reflective eyes of several crocodiles lying in wait. Usually in Australia, where there are fish, there are crocodiles. Famed crocodile expert and conservationist, the late Steve Irwin, was well known for releasing problem crocodiles into the Kennedy River. The national park has been declared an area for crocodile conservation. They were protected there, and anglers knew the dangers of getting too close to the water. The largest resident croc was estimated to be about 4 meters, 13 feet long. Some regulars to the river predicted that the crocodile would attack someone one day. It was always bold. It could be seen stalking you, moving right up to the edge of the bank when it saw someone walking along it. Occasionally, there would be a splash in the water, and one of the ducks would disappear. The crocodiles were always on the lookout for a meal. As Kevin cast his lure into the water, he reeled it back slowly, repeating the process over and over. But then, as he was reeling the line back in, there was a tug. He struck the rod upwards, but realized that it wasn't a fish. Instead, his hook had caught on some underwater vegetation. He pulled the rod back, hoping to release the lure, but it was stuck fast. There are two scenarios that happened next. One suggests that Kevin was careless, a claim that his friends and family fiercely deny. The other suggests that Kevin slipped and fell into the water. Here, we describe both possibilities. Kevin could see where his taut fishing line fed into the water. It was just a few feet from the riverbank. Then when he reached the water's edge, he took a single step into the cool water of the river. All of a sudden, there was an explosion from the water, and a crocodile erupted outwards. Kevin let out a cry of alarm as he was seized in the crocodile's jaws. Less than a second later, he was dragged into the water. There was a swirl, and he was gone. Nobody saw a thing, but his friends heard his cry, followed by a large splash. They knew something had happened and raced to Kevin's fishing spot. His friend John Patey, who was visiting from New South Wales, took less than half a minute to get to the spot. When he arrived, there was no sign of Kevin. His fishing rod was gone. His hat had disappeared. It immediately became clear that Kevin had been taken by a crocodile, and they ran for help. No lure is worth risking your life for, but sitting on the riverbank fishing as he had done so for many years, Kevin had let his guard down. He had become complacent. A momentary lapse in concentration and common sense had cost Kevin his life. or had it. Maybe that's not exactly what happened. Those who knew Kevin knew he wouldn't have been so careless. They said that Kevin was always warning people to be careful in croc country. Making a careless mistake like stepping into the water to retrieve a lure just didn't sound like Kevin. Kevin's friend John, who was the first to arrive at the scene, thought that Kevin had fallen into the water rather than entered to retrieve a lure. Beside Kevin's flip-flops was a large goanna. Before he heard the almighty splash and a cry for help, John thinks he heard Kevin shouting at something. Perhaps he was trying to shoo the goanna away and lost his footing and fell into the water, only to be taken by the crocodile seconds later. There was no sign of any water on the riverbank, suggesting that the crocodile or crocodiles had not leapt out of the water, as had first been assumed by experts. A search immediately began for Kevin, but there was no sign of him. For the first few moments under the water, he would have been fighting, trying to pry open the reptile's jaws. But saltwater crocodiles are thought to have the strongest bite force in the animal kingdom, reaching pressures up to 3,700 psi, more than 5 times stronger than that of a lion. Kevin had little hope. Recently, another man was taken by a crocodile, but miraculously lived to tell the tale. When he was dragged down to the bottom of the river, he managed to gouge the crocodile's eyes, and it released him. But Kevin wasn't so lucky. The crocodile would have drowned him within minutes, taking him far below the river surface, where there was no hope of escape. As the hours passed, hopes for Kevin faded. There was now no doubt in his friends' minds that he had been taken by a crocodile. Wildlife officials were called in, and they scoured the river for any crocodiles nearby. Less than 1 mile upriver, they came across 2 crocodiles lying just below the surface. Suspecting that at least one of these 2 was responsible for Kevin's disappearance, the officers took aim and shot both of them within 10 seconds of each other. They hauled the bodies out of the water and cut them open on the riverbank, right then and there. They needed answers for Kevin's family and friends. Remarkably, inside both the crocodiles were human remains. They belonged to Kevin. One of the crocodiles was huge, measuring 4.1 meters, 13.5 feet. It was likely the well-known croc that had lived along that stretch of river for decades, observed cautiously by fellow anglers. Wildlife officers had caught the culprits, but it was difficult to say exactly what had happened. It would have been incredibly rare for both crocodiles to have struck Kevin at the same time, working together to bring him down. Equally, it would have been unusual for the larger crocodile to allow the smaller one to feast on its kill. Whatever happened, whether the 65-year-old deliberately stepped into the water or accidentally fell, Kevin was gone. The fishing trip had ended in tragedy, and there was proof that he had been snatched by not 1, but 2 crocodiles. Every year in Australia, 1 or 2 people are killed by saltwater crocodiles. This is a very small number given the number of crocodiles in Australian waterways. Ever since a ban on hunting the prehistoric reptiles came into force in 1971, their numbers have exploded, but thankfully, human-crocodile conflicts are relatively rare. People know the dangers and stay away from the water's edge. In Siem Reap, Cambodia's second-largest city, crocodile farms provide an income for many individuals and their families. There are more than 2,800 crocodile farms in Cambodia, Thailand, and Vietnam. They house more than 1.53 million crocodiles between them. Farming these huge reptiles in Southeast Asia is big business, and they are mostly exported to China, Thailand, and Vietnam. But harvesting apex predators is a deadly game. 72-year-old Luan Nam owned one of these crocodile farms. He had been in the business for years. His farm was optimized for crocodile farming, using minimal inputs for maximum outputs. The Cambodian farmer had had close calls with the animals on his farm before. He grew them to collect their eggs, sell their meat, and sell their skin. It provided a meager income for him and his family, but he knew the business inside out. Following the dangerous incidents that had happened before, his family had begged him for years to close up and find something else to do. But it was a way of life for him. In fact, he was president of the local Crocodile Farmers Association and considered an expert in the field. The concrete enclosure was a bleak environment for the crocodiles. They had access to a pool to cool off in and cages in which they could lay their eggs. The square enclosure had no environmental enrichment or form of stimulation. They were tossed raw meat a couple of times a day. There were so many crocodiles that fights often broke out as they competed for space and food. There were a variety of crocodile species at the farm. They ranged in size and color. Most lay sunning themselves on the hard concrete surrounds. Others lay submerged in the dark green pool, their eyes and nostrils poking above the surface. But these are the conditions on most of Cambodia's crocodile farms. Recently, crocodile farmers have formed an unlikely bond with conservationists who are trying to keep the wild populations alive. Gangs of crocodile hunters throughout Cambodia who illegally capture crocodiles from the wild and sell them to farms. There are now less than 400 wild Siamese crocodiles in Cambodia, and although farmers have contributed to their demise, they may now provide the answer. There are thought to be around 900 farms in Cambodia with a total stock of more than 250,000 crocodiles. But farmers are now part of their conservation. As well as selling them for meat and leather, farmers are transporting them to conservation teams to release individuals into the wild to boost the wild population. In May 2023, Luan was checking the crocodile cages on his farm. A female had laid a clutch of eggs overnight. For Luan to collect them, he needed to get the crocodile out of the cage. He ushered her out, but she was reluctant to move. She was protective of her clutch and hissed at Luan when he approached. Slowly, she began to move toward the exit of the cage. Luan held his stick out in front of him, a feeble barrier between himself and the fearsome crocodiles. He used the stick to whack the crocodiles if they came too close, or to block any lunges made toward him. He had done this hundreds of times before, but this time he made a mistake. As the crocodile pulled herself out of the cage, she eyed Luan. Instead of slipping back into the water with the others, she wheeled her head around and snapped her jaws. She was lightning fast. She grabbed the stick in her powerful jaws and tugged her head backwards. Luan, who had a firm grip on the other end of the stick, was pulled toward the crocodile. He lost his footing and fell down into the enclosure where 40 others were lying in wait. They immediately turned their heads as he crashed onto the floor, and they started to crawl toward him. Their eyes were unblinking, their mouths set in a fixed grin. It was like a huge swarm advancing as all 40 individuals closed in on him. He had nowhere to go and nothing to protect himself with, not even his stick. One crocodile lunged forward and caught him in its jaws. Luan knew he was in trouble. With a bite force exceeding 3,500 pounds per square inch, there was no way he was going to break free. They are known to grab their prey and not let go. Their apparently fat necks are actually extra jaw muscles, enabling them to latch onto prey much bigger than themselves and hold on to them until they drown under the water. Luan knew this was very bad news. Even if he managed to free himself from one crocodile, he had another 39 to contend with. Even so, he fought back, hitting the crocodile on its snout as it attempted to drag him toward the water. The others continued to approach. Some emerged from the pool, their scaly bodies dripping with water, their heads swaying from side to side as they moved toward him with their characteristic ungainly walk. As the tussle between man and reptile ensued, the crocodiles became excited. They were enticed to Luan as he scrambled about on the concrete floor. He was dragged closer and closer to the water. The pain of the bite was surging through his body. The crocodile's sharp teeth bit through skin, muscle, and bone. He cried out, but nobody could help him. He was on his own now. He was at the mercy of 40 hungry crocodiles with 60 million years of killing instinct packed into their armored bodies. Another crocodile lunged forward and grabbed hold of Luan. Then another and another. As more crocodiles began to bite their keeper, it turned into a feeding frenzy. It was a bloodbath as each enormous crocodile fought for its chance to grab some fresh meat. Luan was dragged into the water. The swarm of crocodiles leapt in after him. In the water, he was ripped to shreds. The water frothed and foamed and splashed around him. Within minutes, Luan was dead. It was a gruesome death. The enclosure was covered in red, like a scene from a horror movie. When emergency services arrived on the scene, he had been dragged from the water, back onto the concrete surrounds. He was surrounded by the huge reptiles. Some had retreated to the water. Others were clearly still interested in the body. The scene before them was traumatizing and shocking for all who witnessed it, not least of all his family. Emergency services struggled to retrieve Luan's body from the enclosure. Whenever they came close, the crocodiles would advance. Their mouths were open wide and they hissed menacingly at the intruders. They were protecting their prey. One of the policemen spotted a crocodile lying stock still beside the water. He noticed something inside its mouth. When he looked a little harder, he saw that it was one of Luan's black sandals in its jaws. It was a chilling image that will haunt him forever. Eventually, the 72-year-old's remains were recovered and his family was able to lay him to rest. His traumatized family decided to sell the farm and all the crocodiles, something they had wanted Luan to do for years. But sadly, he had never listened. It was a Saturday on June 7, 2014, when Bill Scott and his wife Rosalind headed out to Darwin, Australia, and made their way to Bill Dean Billabong. The Billabong, which is located on the South Alligator River system inside Kakadu National Park, was one of Bill's favorite places in the entire world. The man was nothing if not an enthusiastic fisherman. He'd been going to the Billabong for the past 20 years, often joined by his family. In fact, Bill would camp there 2 or 3 times a year, taking every opportunity to spend some quality time in that special place. The man loved anything that had to do with the outdoors and the landscape of the Northern Territory. He loved buying maps and planning trips to remote locations. He had decades of experience as a bushman, a fisherman, and a boater. That was his lifestyle, and he was well aware of both the dangers and the beauties of nature. Once Bill and Rosalind arrived at the Billabong, they were greeted by their son Aaron and his wife Joanne. Like his father, Aaron was also deeply devoted to the outdoors. He'd been going on trips into the wild ever since he was a kid, always an enthusiastic presence at his father's side. Both Bill and Aaron had their boats, and they were eager to get out on the water and start fishing amidst the beauty of Kakadu National Park. Kakadu National Park is a World Heritage Site with diverse landscape, flora, and fauna. Many plant and animal species in the park are rare, endangered, vulnerable, or endemic, perfectly adapted to their habitat. But there are some species that thrive inside the park, so much so that they are now considered a problem. It is the case of crocodiles, which have, over time, taken over the park's waterways. Crocodile hunting has been banned since 1972. Ever since, their number has skyrocketed, and some experts consider there to be an overpopulation. In fact, some even speculate crocodiles inside the Kakadu National Park are now as large and as numerous as before European settlement. Bill Scott knew there were crocodiles in the park. He never took unnecessary risks. Once he and his wife Rosalind arrived at the Bill Dean Billabong, they met up with Aaron, their son, and Joanne, their daughter-in-law. They had breakfast together, catching up. Then, at about 10 a.m., they put their boats in the water, ready to head out on the Billabong and start fishing. The family was cautious enough to look for crocodiles, but there were none in the water. Still, they knew to be careful near the edges of the water. Their small boats were perfect for navigating on the Billabong. They moved upstream for about 3 miles. Then Bill and his family started fishing. They weren't in a hurry. It was a Saturday morning, and they planned to camp in the park until Monday. The family spent the next 4 hours fishing and chatting, happy to take in the sun and be with each other. At about 2 p.m., they decided it was time to head back to the camp. Bill and his son moored their boats. Then Aaron and his wife Joanne left to go up the bank to fetch the 60-liter tank the family usually took camping. They needed to fill it, and then let it sit in the sun, a simple procedure that would guarantee warm water for washing in the evening. Aaron entered the water up to his knees. He knew there were crocodiles, and he didn't want to risk his life. He was in and out in seconds, only filling half of the tank. The rest would have to be filled by the whole family, but in a seemingly safer manner. Aaron then carried the tank to a flat spot on the bank. Meanwhile, Bill was still in their own boat. He was at the back of his small boat. He took a bucket, leaned over the boat's edge, filled the bucket with water, and then passed the vessel to his wife, Rosalind, who was standing on the bank. Rosalind took the bucket and then handed it to Joanne further up the bank. Joanne finally handed it to Aaron, who poured the water inside the tank. It was teamwork. Everyone chipped in. After the second bucket, the tank was nearly full, and the family discussed whether a third bucket was needed or not. Rosalind decided to hand one of the buckets back to Bill and have him fill it, but the man never got the chance. Suddenly, the boat began to rock. At the same time, Rosalind noted a small ripple in the water. The harsh movement knocked Bill Scott off balance. Struggling to steady himself, 62-year-old Bill Scott put his hands out towards the back of the boat, and that's when it happened. A massive crocodile shot out of the water from behind the motor with an unexpected speed. The animal closed its huge jaws around Bill's left arm, shoulder, and chest. It was over in seconds. In an instant, the huge creature snatched Bill Scott from the boat and dragged him deep beneath the water's surface. Rosalind and Joanne watched in horror. Aaron, who had his back turned, thought he heard his father say something, but once he turned around toward his father, he only saw a splash. All of them started crying in terror. Aaron raced to the boat and started circling the area, hoping his father would somehow manage to free himself from the croc's mouth and swim back to the surface. In reality, there was nothing they could do to help the man. He was nowhere to be seen. The family started screaming louder. "Bill, if you could hear us, make a noise and we'll come find you," they called out. But there was no answer. Aaron then jumped into his boat, reversed it some 50 feet, stopped and looked around. Nothing. Then he spotted a ripple about 165 feet downstream. He chased it, but once again saw nothing. Aaron then hurried to a nearby resort to raise the alarm, leaving Rosalind and Joanne at the billabong. The women kept watch, and then they saw Bill's body floating to the surface, face down in the water. Rosalind tried to start the boat, but couldn't get it to start. Instead, she rowed it into the billabong, intent on retrieving her husband's body. But by the time Rosalind made it out, Bill's body had disappeared again, dragged beneath the surface by the powerful animal. Once Aaron returned with help, they resumed their search, but all efforts had to be ceased once it got dark. The search recommenced the following morning. Just before noon, Water Cop Wade Rogers shot a crocodile fitting the description of the one that took Bill. The crocodile measured 15 feet. It was indeed a huge creature. An autopsy was conducted at the location. As soon as rangers opened up the body, they were met with a gruesome sight. Bill Scott's remains were found inside the crocodile's stomach. Bill Scott's tragic fate sparked an inquest indicating that crocodiles have become familiar with humans and boats and generally have not developed the fear of humans that once existed when humans were also predators. This means crocodiles in the area are no longer afraid to snatch humans out of their boats. Of the 21 people killed by crocs in the Northern Territory since 1974, 4 died in 2014, the largest annual toll since records began. It was February 22, 2023, a Wednesday. Alistair McPhee and his dog Magic Molly were enjoying a beautiful day together. McPhee and his rottweiler had been traveling all across Australia. Far North Queensland was only one of their stops. The two of them had a special bond. They were best friends and traveling buddies. The day was somewhat gloomy. The sky was overcast and the water was reflecting its gray color. Evening was close, but the day was far from over, at least to McPhee. The man and his dog were at the Bloomfield boat ramp at Ayton, north of the city of Cairns and about 30 miles south of Cooktown. McPhee wanted to enter the water, despite the fact that it looked anything but inviting. Sure, Bloomfield River was gray and quite angry that day, but the 37-year-old man wasn't one to back off from a challenge. In fact, McPhee had a wild plan. He wanted to enter the river for 2 reasons. First, Magic Molly, his rottweiler, could do with a drink of water. Secondly, McPhee had expressed his interest in wanting to catch a water python. That's probably why he wanted to have proof of them entering the water. After all, why do something like this if no one could see it? McPhee put his recording device down on the ground, stripped down to his swim shorts, and made sure Magic Molly followed him. Together, man and dog entered the water, unaware that their fate was about to change. What Alistair McPhee didn't know, or perhaps had ignored, was that his plan was immensely dangerous, and not because of any water pythons. Like all other pythons, this species is not venomous, nor is it especially dangerous, though water pythons are known to be aggressive. Even more, their name is largely misleading. These snakes are found far from water for most of the year, though they seek it out when surprised. There were other, far more dangerous things lurking beneath the surface, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. Local authorities had issued a warning about the water just weeks before McPhee and Molly's arrival at the boat ramp. Footage filmed by a civilian surfaced on the internet, showing a huge saltwater crocodile watching from the river. See that croc, everyone? Beware of your children, because he is hanging around here, the man who filmed the video says. The footage prompted authorities to issue a similar warning, urging people to be careful near the boat ramp and surrounds. We don't know whether Alistair McPhee didn't know about the warning or he simply didn't care. What we do know is that at about 5:30 p.m. that Wednesday, the man and his rottweiler, Magic Molly, entered the water. They only took a few steps before their reality came crashing down. McPhee was not knee-deep yet when something huge shot out of the gray water, opened its strong jaws, and then clamped them down on the man's leg. Magic Molly acted within seconds. The pupper was brave enough to make an attempt to save Alistair McPhee, no matter the cost. In an instant, the huge crocodile turned its attention to the dog. Once again, it opened its jaws. This time, the terrifying teeth closed around the dog. McPhee could have taken the opportunity to save himself and get out of the water, but to him, that was never really an option. Instead, the man started punching the huge crocodile. His punches rained down on the animal, but they weren't enough. The crocodile was simply too strong. It won the battle. Instead of letting Magic Molly go, the crocodile went back underwater, the brave dog still in its mouth. McPhee watched in shock, but there was nothing he could do to save Magic Molly. The best he could do was save himself. Bloodied and struggling with shock, the 37-year-old man didn't know what to do. Luckily, a nearby ranger happened to witness the attack. The woman rushed to help McPhee. She had just finished first aid training and acted quickly. The man was treated at the Wujal Clinic before a rescue helicopter airlifted him to Cairns Hospital. The man's condition was stable, but he had to undergo surgery the next morning. Still, the physical pain he experienced was nothing compared to the hurt of having lost his beloved dog. Alistair McPhee was devastated. A saltwater crocodile is no negligible foe. The saltwater crocodile is the world's largest living reptile. They can grow up to a length of 20 feet and a weight of 3,300 pounds. They're apex predators, capable of prevailing over almost any animal that enters their territory, including humans. They have strong tendencies to see us humans as prey, and usually humans don't stand a chance against these creatures. Alistair McPhee himself wouldn't have probably survived the attack were it not for Magic Molly's courage and loyalty. Thursday, February 24th, a day after the attack, Wildlife officers managed to shoot a huge crocodile measuring 14 feet. The crocodile was found some 700 feet away from where the attack happened. Magic Molly's remains were found inside the animal's stomach. Killing the crocodile, authorities declared, hadn't been a choice. It had been a necessity. It's important for communities in croc country to feel safe and for problem crocodiles to be dealt with appropriately. Remember, warning signs are not there as decoration, and swimming in croc country is a choice. As soon as news of the attack reached the public, several theories surfaced as to why Alistair McPhee had entered the water. The reason? McPhee failed to officially mention it. He told authorities Magic Molly had been thirsty, so he'd taken the dog to the boat ramp for a drink of water. But comments in a Facebook thread in the months leading up to the attack have since surfaced. It's hard to go full bush here. Everything is native land. I want to catch a big water python, but the crocs, you see, McPhee wrote to a friend. But the friend wasn't as enthusiastic as McPhee. As far as the crocs go, just don't develop a pattern of waterside visits, they said. McPhee issued an official statement while he was still in the hospital, recovering from his injuries. He thanked staff at Cairns Hospital for looking after him. He also thanked Magic Molly, who the man said was always by his side. Alistair McPhee stated, "I have unfortunately learned the hard way. Everyone needs to be croc-wise in croc territory. While I am recovering from my injuries, I am asking people to please respect my privacy." On March 16, 2009, 11-year-old Bryony Ann Goodsell, her younger sister, 7-year-old Bethany Goodsell, and her friend, Naomi Lang, were playing at home in Darwin's rural outskirts. It was a Sunday, and the girls were enjoying some free time, despite the weather. March is a moody month in the top end of the Northern Territory in Australia. It's the last month, at least officially, of the wet season, meaning there's always a possibility of floods and cyclones. The days are hot and humid, and thunderstorms are not at all uncommon. With such weather, exploring the outdoors can be a little tiring, but not when you're a kid and the whole world seems like a wonderful adventure. All four of them got on bikes, and then they started pedaling together. It was a good, honest day of fun. They weren't going too far from home, just somewhere they could swim. Bryony and her friends called the creek crossing Black Jungle. They'd swum there before, so they knew the spot well. From their understanding and previous experience, there was nothing to be feared in those waters. The area was accessible to the public, or better said, part of it was accessible to the public, even young kids wanting to play in the water. The creek crossing was immediately adjacent to the Lambell's Lagoon access gate to the Black Jungle Conservation Reserve. Lambell's Lagoon is a mostly rural suburban area on the fringe of metropolitan Darwin, Australia. Bryony Goodsell, her sister, and their friends were all part of the community's few hundred inhabitants. The Black Jungle Conservation Reserve, the designated place for their adventure on March 16, 2009, is a 10,000-acre protected area and part of the Adelaide River coastal floodplain. It's a wetland habitat supporting large numbers of wildlife. The reserve's open woodland savanna, its monsoon rainforest, and swamps provide rich habitats for numerous varied species, such as magpie geese, water pythons, and the terrifying saltwater crocodiles. To Bryony and the rest of the children, the area was simply perfect for outdoor adventures. They usually swam in the creek when it filled with water during the wet season. On that Sunday, the kids initially swam near the access gate to the reserve, so not quite in the protected area. Each access gate was fitted with a sign indicating access by permit only. It wasn't unusual for rangers to deal with illegal entry by hunters. Some members of the public also used their vehicles to gain illegal entry to the reserve, most often than not by damaging gates and fences. As for permits, they were only granted for scientific research. Bryony Goodsell, her sister Bethany, and their friends Naomi and Aidan swam for a while on the public side of the fence. But shortly after, they decided to go further downstream to another crossing. this one located inside the reserve. This new creek crossing had a deeper but less fast-flowing pool of water. In order to get to this spot, the four children had to go through a wire boundary fence and walk a short distance. Despite the reserve's reputation as a habitat for some dangerous species, there was no warning about the possibility of crocodile activity in the area. As the reserve rangers knew, there was plenty of crocodile activity within the reserve, especially in the wet season. But despite this, the rangers weren't aware that people were swimming at the reserve. After all, public access was strictly prohibited. This meant, at least in the rangers' perspective, that the chance of interaction between crocodiles and humans was low in the reserve. But people were swimming there. Shortly after the decision to swim elsewhere had been taken, the kids reached the creek crossing inside Black Jungle Reserve. The water levels were indeed high, the way they'd expected, but the creek was also flowing fast. Any adult might have hesitated to get into the water. Most likely, an adult wouldn't have entered the water at all. The conditions were perfect for drowning. But these were kids. The youngest of them was only 7 years old, the oldest only 12. Children aren't the best at assessing the potential dangers of a situation. And to make matters even worse, these particular kids had no idea there were crocs in the area. So instead of worrying about dying and turning around to leave, the group of four entered the water at about 5:30 p.m. They splashed around, swam, and played, happy to have some fun. But then everything changed in the blink of an eye. Suddenly, 11-year-old Bryony Goodsell started to scream for help. The other kids turned toward the girl and saw she was starting to go under the water. At first, one of her friends thought Bryony had a vine wrapped around her waist and she was struggling to free herself. But then the same friend saw the truth was far more terrifying. A crocodile tail came out of the water and then went right back in. "Crocodile!" their friend yelled, turning to look for the other children. When the kids looked back, Bryony was gone. The children scrambled out of the water towards safety. Authorities were alerted. Police started looking for Bryony. Human remains and a pair of shorts were found the following day, on Monday, over 1,400 feet from where the girl disappeared on Sunday. DNA tests confirmed the remains were indeed Bryony's. Coroner Greg Kavanaugh confirmed the death was due to a crocodile attack. Even more, evidence suggested it was a saltwater crocodile of about 10 feet that attacked the little girl. Saltwater crocodiles are not only the largest living reptile, but they are also the most aggressive crocodile species. They are apex predators, preying on any living creature within their reach. The search for the crocodile responsible for the attack continued throughout Monday, but it was called off on Tuesday. The reasoning behind this decision was simple. Rangers believed the crocodile had headed back into a floodplain, which made the search impossible. Floodplains teem with crocodiles. There was no guarantee that authorities would be able to pinpoint the exact animal that killed Bryony and Goodsell. An investigation found that residents in the area had no idea there were crocodiles in the creek. The only resident that seemed to be aware crocodiles could be in the creek had also swam in the exact same waters before. Bryony's mother, Charlene O'Sullivan, believed the wording of the sign "access by permit only" was misleading. She argued that the kids might have believed the sign indicating that vehicles and hunting were indeed prohibited, but not entering the area by foot. Even more, signs indicating prohibited activities, such as swimming, were also added. And finally, all entry gates to the reserve were fitted with crocodile warning signs. While crocodile culling was discouraged, authorities reviewed and adjusted the saltwater crocodile management plan after Bryony's death. The current crocodile management plan, prepared and approved by the Northern Territory government, promises the community that there will be increased attention to and efforts with regard to public safety, said Coroner Greg Kavanaugh. Bryony's family asked to be left alone to grieve their huge loss. They released a statement calling Bryony a beautiful, innocent, and fearless child that touched the lives of many. The family also called Bryony's death a tragic accident. Their statement said, "Kids being kids don't always see possible dangers. No one is to blame for this tragedy. It is just one of those things." 24-year-old Paul McLean was taking a vacation from his high-flying career. The intelligent, witty, and charismatic young man had graduated from Oxford University and had landed an incredible job as a journalist for the Financial Times. He had worked for them for the past 2 years, spending months in Belgium as a correspondent, where he put his first-class French degree to good use. Working for the Financial Times was his first job since graduating. Before that, he spent a year in France teaching English and translating for local police officers as the only Briton in that part of the rural Ardennes. Despite being an exceptional linguist, Paul had developed a flair as a journalist. His eagerness to report in-depth, often hidden stories made him stand out from the crowd. He produced an eye-opening piece that stunned even the most senior of journalists on the 759 treaties the UK would need to establish post-Brexit. His talented writing for original, insightful, and deeply researched journalism was admired by his colleagues. But when Paul decided to take a holiday with his friends in Sri Lanka, disaster struck. He and his friends were staying at the East Beach Surf Resort in the southeast of Sri Lanka when they headed to Elephant Rock in Arugum Bay. Situated about 220 miles east of the capital Colombo, the bay was well known as a tourist hotspot for learning to surf. The gentle waves that glided into the beach were perfect for beginners. The golden sands and incredible sunsets were a sight to behold. Paul walked into Safa Surf School, where the owner Fawaz Lafir was only too happy to assist. Pulling on wetsuits, the friends paddled into the sea and learned how to catch the waves, balance on their boards, and stand up while being propelled forward by the sea. It was an incredible experience, and Paul was having a great time. But the call of nature halted his surfing momentarily. He was told by the locals that there were no facilities nearby, so Paul headed for some cover. As the beach that lines the bay curves around, there's a lagoon on the other side of the sand, so that the beach forms a narrow spit of land between the lagoon and the sea. Paul walked along this and looked out over the muddy lagoon. Lining it on the far side were some trees and bushes. Paul made his way around the edge of the water, walking about 800 meters away from the beach. He needed some privacy, but little did he know he was being watched. Under the lagoon surface lay a large crocodile. It was hidden by the murkiness of the water. Resting on the muddy bottom, its teeth were visible along the sides of its closed mouth. The vibrations from Paul's footsteps were detected by the giant reptile, and it rose upwards to investigate. It watched its potential prey silently and stealthily, its eyes fixed on the prize. It didn't move a muscle, but instead waited patiently for the opportune moment to strike. Paul found a suitable bush. With his back turned to the water, the crocodile slowly swam closer, only its eyes and nostrils protruding out of the water. Then, when it was within feet of the bank, it sank to the bottom of the lagoon. It was hidden in the shallows, its dark green-gray skin camouflaged in its environment. When Paul had finished, he walked over to the edge of the lagoon. Locals knew not to go near water like this. There was a hidden danger that had claimed lives before, but to non-native tourists, the water looked harmless. It was perfectly still, with its glassy surface reflecting the sky. Paul could hear the rush of the gentle waves beyond the other side of the lagoon. His friends were still in the water, being knocked off their boards repeatedly as they learned to surf. He would be back to them shortly, but first he crouched down by the edge of the lagoon to wash his hands. Paul hardly had time to react as an enormous crocodile launched itself out of the water. In that split second, all Paul could do was jump backwards. But the crocodile, an expert ambush predator, had accounted for this, and it snapped its jaws shut, catching Paul's right leg. In an instant, the crocodile pulled Paul off his feet and dragged him into the water. The young man let out a yell and waved his arms furiously above the surface of the water for a second before being taken below. Some people walking along the beach admiring the peaceful lagoon saw the attack. They were shocked as they witnessed Paul waving desperately for a few short seconds before disappearing. A local fisherman sitting in his boat in the lagoon also saw the terrifying incident unfold. Under the water, Paul was fighting for his life. He was a fit young man who was a keen squash player and football fan, but the crocodile was powerful and relentless. Paul would likely have reached down trying to pry open the jaws, but he was dragged further into the lagoon. He probably tried punching the crocodile and gouging its eyes, but it was impossible to inflict enough damage underwater. And tragically, within minutes, he was gone. When word got out that someone had been dragged into the lagoon, Paul's friends raced to the water. They looked out over the lagoon, calling Paul's name, hoping upon hope that there had been some kind of mistake. The police were called immediately, and while Paul's friends sat on the sand in total shock, the Army and Navy turned up. There was little they could do due to the murky water in the lagoon. They motored up and down, searching the banks for any sign of Paul. Navy divers then entered the water. Knowing that there was potentially a man-eating crocodile in the water called for nerves of steel. For locals, although there had never been an incident at that specific lagoon, they were aware that the nearby rivers were teeming with crocodiles. They knew not to enter the water and to stay away from the edges. Those who knew about crocodile attacks in the area predicted that Paul's body would show up in a day or two. With no sign of a body, speculation grew. Others were skeptical about whether it was a crocodile or not. There were reports of quicksand in the lagoon and suggestions that Paul may have become trapped in the sand, but this was later dismissed. There are two types of crocodile that live in Sri Lanka: the marsh or mugger crocodile that lives in freshwater environments, and the estuarine or saltwater crocodile that can tolerate both rivers and the open sea. This was the first time a crocodile had attacked a human at Elephant Rock. Until then, it had always been considered a safe place for tourists. The bay was sheltered from any bad weather or strong currents, and the lagoon added to the picture-perfect scenery. The following day, as Navy divers took to the water once more, they came across Paul's body. He was submerged in some mud very close to where he had been taken. There were 6 tooth marks on his right leg where the crocodile had grabbed him. His body was taken to be examined by a medical team. Upon the post-mortem investigation, it was determined that he had died from drowning. It was a horrible and shocking end to a young man's life. He had made a fatal error in washing his hands in the lagoon that day. As the news of his death spread, tributes poured in from his family and friends, fellow students, and his colleagues. It was clear that he would be sorely missed by so many people, and that he was a bright spark who was destined for great things. Colin Devereux was in his mid-60s and still farming cattle in Australia's Northern Territory. It was October, and rainfall had been sparse. His farm in Twin Hill Station was situated near the Finnis River, south of the city of Darwin. During the wet season, the river's floodplain swells, and the water is said to be teeming with crocodiles. But as the rivers dry up, the saltwater giants seek elsewhere to keep cool. In mid-October 2023, Colin headed out to erect some fencing on his farm along a stretch of the Finnis River. It was a regular part of the farm maintenance that he had done countless times before. When he parked his vehicle and jumped out, he noticed something stirring in a nearby billabong. This pool of water was drying up in the heat of the summer. It was full of fish that survived the dry season in the remaining shallow, muddy water. As Colin peered across the billabong, he could see some fish acting strangely. They were agitated by something and swam rapidly toward the middle of the lake. The water had receded and only a shallow, muddy pool remained in the center. Some of their fins broke through the surface and they splashed about. Colin took 2 steps toward the water to take a closer look, but when he did so, something erupted out of the murkiness. It was a 10-foot, 3.2-meter saltwater crocodile. It had been chasing the fish, but upon hearing the vibrations of Colin's footsteps approaching the water's edge, it turned its attention toward the farmer. Completely concealed by the dark brown water, it went undetected by the unsuspecting farmer, but in a flash it secured its jaws around Colin's right foot and leg. He let out a yell as he was pulled off his feet, and then the crocodile turned and dragged Colin into the water. Instinctively, he fought back. Amid the commotion, he was pulled under the surface of the bacteria-infested pool. He couldn't see anything, but he lashed out again and again at the enormous crocodile. Its power was overwhelming. As soon as it grabbed Colin, it shook him like a rag doll, trying to disorient its prey and weaken it. Colin was at its mercy, unable to free his leg from the vice-like grip, but he refused to give up. He was held in such an awkward position that he struggled to make a dent in the crocodile's body. Frantically, he kicked with his left foot, driving it into the animal's underside and into its ribs, but the crocodile didn't flinch. It was used to pulling large mammals into the water that kicked and bucked in its jaws. Its armored skin protected it from the worst of its battles, but there were some weak spots on its body. For any animal, the eyes are considered vulnerable. Colin tried to gouge them with his hands, but he couldn't get a grip. He leaned forward as the crocodile continued to thrash its head from side to side, and he tried to bite it. He was aiming for the animal's back, but instead he felt his head right next to the crocodile's, and he opened his mouth and bit down as hard as he could. As luck would have it, he made contact with the crocodile's eyelid. He felt the tough leathery skin in his mouth and clamped down with his teeth, biting as hard as he could. Then he yanked his head back. The crocodile felt the pain and immediately let go of Colin's leg. It had flinched, and in that split second, Colin seized his chance to escape. But the crocodile hadn't given up. It had merely recoiled briefly before coming back for more. Colin scrambled out of the water, and the crocodile chased him. He ran in big strides up the bank and away from the water. Any second now, he was convinced he would feel the powerful jaws of the salty grab him once more and drag him back to the water. But Colin was surprisingly fast and nimble and sprinted up to his vehicle. He glanced back over his shoulder. After about 13 feet, the crocodile stopped chasing him and gave up. It eyed Colin, who had leapt into his car, and then turned and skulked back to the muddy pool. Colin gasped for breath. His heart was thundering in his chest, and he surveyed the injury to his right leg. It was bleeding, and the crocodile's teeth had created a large open wound. He steadied his breathing before tending to his leg. There was a towel in the back of the vehicle and some rope. He wrapped the towel around his leg and tied it as tightly as he could with the rope. Then he contacted his brother to come and help him. He knew he needed to get his leg seen to as quickly as possible. And he was right. The pool of stagnant water was a breeding ground for bacteria. Ducks and geese frequented the water, turning it into a pool filled with feces. Dead fish also added to the pungent water, and the crocodile itself was capable of surviving in these dirty waters. The nearest hospital was 80 miles or 130 kilometers north from the farm, and Colin's brother raced him there. On the open road, Colin had time to reflect on his ordeal. It kept replaying in his head over and over again. He knew that if the crocodile had bitten him anywhere else, then it would have likely been a very different outcome. When he and his brother finally arrived at the Royal Darwin Hospital, Colin underwent life-saving treatment. He had been right about the dangers of the infected water, and for 10 days in a row, the medical staff opened the wound on his leg and flushed it to clear away any bad bacteria that might take hold. Only once they were certain his wound was no longer infected could they seal it back up. He was treated with a skin graft on the open gash, and gradually over the days and weeks that he spent in the hospital, he began to regain feeling in his lower leg and foot. After 4 weeks of treatment, he was able to wiggle his toes again, and doctors were confident that he would be able to walk. He was released from the hospital 1 month after the ordeal. Although he was almost physically healed again, it would take some time before he could stop thinking about the attack. Colin was lucky to be alive. He believes that although he can recall every detail about the attack as if it was in slow motion, it probably only lasted about 8 seconds or so. But it was 8 seconds in which Colin refused to give up and gave everything to fight back. His idea of biting the crocodile on the back turned out to save his life, when a twist of fate meant that he actually bit down on the animal's eyelid. If the crocodile hadn't turned its head at that moment, then Colin may not have grabbed the sensitive skin around the eye. The attack has shaken Colin. Since it happened, he's reevaluated his life. He has spent so many years walking around those swamplands, close to the water's edge, that he now realizes how dangerous this has been. The attack is going to change how he approaches things from now on, and he says it has really opened his eyes. As for the crocodile, Colin told news reporters that it had been removed. and that he was certain it would not be attacking anyone else. The island of Saibai is one of the few islands that create the Torres Strait archipelago and is situated only 4 kilometers away from the coast of Papua New Guinea. The low-lying island is extremely prone to flooding and rising sea levels, especially in heavy rain seasons. Consequently, its geography is splendid, tropical, and heavy on the swamplands. With only a small portion of the island being inhabited by indigenous Australian people, the Saibayan community is very tight-knit. According to the 2016 census, only around 465 people lived on the island. The lush greenery and crystal-clear waters don't have a lot to offer but fishing and hunting, with the occasional agriculture when the island isn't flooded. What saves many islanders is their strong trade ties with their neighbors, the Dawan and Boigu Islands. Edward Baden Morrison Warrisam, or Baden after his cultural name, lived on the coast of the Cape York Peninsula his entire life. In a small house close to the splendid beaches of Cairns, Baden and his 8 siblings lived with only their mother. From a very young age, Baden learned from his mother and his close community how to sustain his family and how to survive the sea's hidden dangers. Passionate about studying and sports, he was a member of the rugby league club Edmonton Storm from far north Queensland. He never missed an event, even though it wasn't always easy to make it to where his rugby club played. This, however, didn't stop him from following his dreams of one day becoming a great rugby player. Nevertheless, destiny had other plans for the 16-year-old. On an April morning, Baden and his 13-year-old cousin embarked on a journey that would soon prove to be their most treacherous one yet. Fueled by adventure and adrenaline, the 2 boys decided to give in to the embrace of the sea and go on a little fishing trip. The vast sea was comforting for Baden, and he felt he already knew all of its secrets. The area they were traveling through wasn't known to be too dangerous for small voyages, especially in clear skies. So they made their way to the coast and set sail on a dinghy that only fit the 2 of them on a journey from which only one of them would return unharmed. The day started out great. The sun was shining warmly on the Cairns coastline. The breeze wasn't too strong, the sky was clear, and the water was as tranquil as any sea could get. The beginning of their voyage wasn't at all eventful. The 2 young boys left early in the morning so as to have enough time to turn back before sundown. Their goal was to cross the Torres Strait, or at least go as far as possible, take in the beautiful scenery, and come back. If they were to catch some fish on their way, that would have been a bonus. The long journey they embarked on would soon turn sour when the engine of their little dinghy sputtered and eventually died. The sun was barely out, and they were not even close to the coast. Without any oars on board of their tiny dinghy, they tried to divert the boat using their hands. The result wasn't a happy one. It seemed like they didn't move an inch. The waves carried them away, inching them closer and closer to Saibai Island. On their way, not even a boat was in sight that could save them. In the back of his mind, Baden remembered that the Torres Strait was known for something extremely scary. Its shallow waters covered coral reefs that could make their journey to the shore even more difficult than it already was. He knew that if no one would see them soon, they would have to swim to safety. As they got closer and closer to the Saibayan shore, reality started to set in. Their only chance to survive the remaining leg of their journey to safety was to abandon the dinghy and swim almost 500 meters toward the shore. As Baden presented his plan to his little cousin, the waves suddenly started to become bigger and bigger, almost knocking them out of the boat. Uncertainty was filling the air. The clock was ticking, and there was no more room for hesitation. Holding tightly the little hand of his cousin, they jumped in. Although the water in Torres Strait isn't very deep, with a depth of only 7 to 15 meters, it was difficult for the 13-year-old to keep his feet and arms moving in order to stay afloat. In those moments, he imagined he was simply swimming along the beach in Cairns, where he grew up. He imagined that, at the end of this entire debacle, he would be welcomed with the warm embrace of his beach towel. But now his responsibility was to keep his young cousin alive. He couldn't have lived on if he knew something had happened to the 13-year-old boy. Slowly but surely, they were getting closer and closer to the shore. With only a few meters left, the 13-year-old boy used his last traces of energy and pushed himself to exhaustion in order to touch land faster. Eventually, he was safe. With his entire body aching and his lungs burning, he collapsed on the sandy beach and looked around for Bitten. There was no trace of him. Not in the water, not on land. Nowhere. At that very moment, Bitten was fighting for his life in the jaws of a hidden predator, a crocodile. When the 16-year-old saw that his cousin had managed to touch land, he let out a sigh of relief. Happiness flooded him as they were now one step closer to being rescued. As he was battling the now gentle waves, he felt something grazing his leg. Thinking that it was probably a coral reef, as he was getting closer and closer to the shore and the water was more shallow, he wasn't alarmed at first. However, the second time, he screamed in pain. A 4-meter crocodile followed his prey, motivated by primal hunger that only human flesh could possibly satisfy. In a heartbeat, Batten's world collapsed around him as he was plunged into the jaws of the crocodile. His little cousin was too far away to see him struggling in the shallow waters that surrounded him, so he knew his desperate attempts to set himself free from the ferocious beast were probably useless. As pain and terror flooded his mind, he simply couldn't believe that the relaxing voyage he envisioned earlier would turn into his last moments alive. In a surge of power, the crocodile dragged Bitten under the water and mauled him until his last breath. As people were hurrying on the Siberian shore to help the 13-year-old survivor, Batten's body was left disfigured and floating peacefully until it was finally recovered several hours later in the afternoon. What the 16-year-old boy left behind is a single mother, 8 saddened siblings, and an entire community that was unable to do anything but mourn him. His mother, Kimana Kusu, urged people who knew him or read his story to help her face the tragedy and support her family during the difficult time she is now facing through a GoFundMe. For the curious, humble boy who was always smiling and eager to help anyone who crossed his path, on April 18, 2024, life was too cruel, and the ending to his story came too early. It was evening time in Mozambique's western province of Tete. As the sun began to set, a coolness descended over the mighty Zambezi River. This incredible river is the 4th longest in Africa, carving its way through 7 different countries and over the Victoria Falls. It provides a lifeline for thousands of communities and a home to millions of animals, some of Africa's most dangerous animals. Hippos lie submerged in the murky waters, elephants amble down the muddy riverbanks for a drink, and crocodiles lurk in the shallows. In fact, the river is overrun with crocodiles, and they are causing a significant problem in Mozambique. Despite an economy that has grown dramatically since the end of the Civil War, the wealth of the country isn't trickling down to the masses. People in Mozambique are still desperately poor. Many live on the banks of the country's rivers. They drink the water, they bathe in it, and they wash their clothes and dishes there. The everyday mundane chores become life-or-death missions as more and more people are plucked from the riverbanks by the enormous crocodiles. The crocodiles that inhabit the Zambezi are Nile crocodiles. They can grow up to 5 meters or 16 feet long and weigh up to 750 kilograms or 1,650 pounds. It's considered one of the most dangerous species of crocodile in the world and is responsible for hundreds of human deaths every year. They are opportunistic and generalist predators. They take a variety of prey, from fish and birds to medium and large mammals such as antelope, zebra, and buffalo. They have also been observed scavenging, traveling hundreds of meters from the water to feast upon a carcass, sometimes even stealing a lion's kill. They are an important animal, vital for the ecosystem, but one which instills fear in people. They are naturally aggressive and can survive for weeks between meals, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike and take down their prey. Surprisingly, they are sociable animals. They tolerate each other in close proximity, often basking together, with the larger males taking the prime spots. They sometimes feed together in groups if a carcass is large enough. Both the males and the females protect their eggs, and once the young hatch, they provide some protection for them too, at least for a short period of time. But we humans rarely see that side of them. For locals living in close proximity to these apex predators, they bring terror and are feared by men and women, young and old. Over the decades, there's been a growing crocodile problem in Mozambique. Some of the reptiles have grown into enormous individuals that have wreaked havoc on rural communities. People go to the river to wash their dishes, never to return. They simply vanish in the thin air. There are beliefs of witchcraft and bad omens. Some people are trialed for conjuring up evil spirits in the form of crocodiles to take away people they don't like. The government seems reluctant to admit it has a problem. It half-heartedly tries to deal with the issue by culling crocodiles once a year. But this doesn't solve the problem. The cull usually takes the smaller crocodiles out of the water, as they are easier to catch. This makes room for the larger, more aggressive ones that are responsible for the growing number of attacks in Mozambique. One such crocodile was on the hunt on Thursday, the 16th of March, 2017. It remained concealed below the water's surface, waiting for the perfect ambush, patiently biding its time before the perfect opportunity to strike. It had been submerged for almost an hour, using its incredibly slow metabolism and efficient hemoglobin to hold its breath the entire time. There was no way anybody was able to spot it just feet from the riverbank. Its perfect opportunity to strike was closing in as 19-year-old Estevio Alberto Gino went jogging along the banks of the Zambezi that evening. He was running in the Tet province, 600 kilometers inland from where the Zambezi flows into the Indian Ocean. He was a fit young man and an excellent soccer player. He played center defense and was a force to be reckoned with on the soccer field. His team was Mozambique's second division club, Atlético Mineiro de Tet. They were a tight-knit team. They were brothers. He jogged along with two of his friends who were neighbors of his from his village. It was a light bit of exercise, something he did most evenings to keep up his fitness, a training regime that kept him in the game. As the three of them wound their way along the river, they chatted, following their usual route along the well-worn path until they came to the end of their run. They stopped beside the river, sucking in the cool evening air and shaking out their legs. He clambered down the riverbank and walked to the water. It was refreshing, just a quick cool-off before he headed home, ready for something to eat, ready for a rest, and then ready to start a new day. But he was being watched, not only by his two friends who remained high up on the bank, but by a lethal predator, the enormous crocodile that was submerged just below the surface, a see-through membrane protecting its eyes from the water as it watched the young man crouching just feet from where it lay. It didn't make a sound. It didn't move a muscle. Its knobby olive skin camouflaged under the reflective water. Then it chose its moment. In a split second, it launched itself out of the water. Its jaws opened wide, all 100 teeth on display. In that moment, Estevio had no time to react. He only felt a surge of adrenaline as he saw the water in front of him rise and the enormous head of a crocodile fly toward him. He tried to jump upwards and out of the way, but his reaction time wasn't quick enough. The crocodile grabbed him around his waist and tugged powerfully backward. Estevio gasped as the mouth clamped around him. He instinctively tried to pry open the jaws with his bare hands, but it was impossible. In an instant, Estevio was pulled off his feet and into the water, never to be seen again. His friends leapt backwards in horror. They screamed and yelled as their friend vanished beneath the surface of the Zambezi. It had all happened so quickly. One moment Estevio was there, and the next he was gone. There was no long, drawn-out wrestle, no chance for them to step in and attempt to save their friend. They had all been taken completely by surprise and completely off guard. All that was left of the attack were the ripples from where Estevio had been taken into the river. For a short time under the water, Estevio was likely fighting for his life. For a few terrifying minutes, he struggled to free himself. The crocodile, estimated to be around 5 meters or 15 feet long, pulled him downwards into the murky depths of the Zambezi, a place where the sunlight doesn't penetrate. where mud and silt rose up in clouds with the undercurrents. The crocodile held him firmly in its jaws, securing its prey with a bite force of 3,700 psi, compared to just 160 psi for that of a human. It would have performed a death roll, designed to drown its victims by disorienting them and knocking the air from their lungs. If Estevio hadn't bled to death by now, he would have drowned within minutes of being taken. His friends rushed to call local police. Emergency services arrived at the scene and scoured the water for any sign of the young footballer. No trace of him has ever been found. It was yet another devastating incident in which a person lost their life to the Zambezi's crocodiles. It seems the government needs to do more to tackle this problem. It was May 2016, and 47-year-old Leanne Mitchell was finally cancer-free and ready to put that horrible chapter of her life to rest. There was only one person Leanne had wanted to see once she had finished her cancer treatment: Cindy Waldron, her best friend since forever. They'd met in high school, and nothing had come between them ever since. They had always remained close, despite the physical distance between them, with Cindy living in Lithgow, New South Wales, and Leanne living in Trinity Beach, Cairns. Over the years, Cindy and Leanne had been together through it all, happiness and sadness alike. And when Leanne was diagnosed with breast cancer, nothing could get Cindy to leave her friend's side. Once Leanne Mitchell found out her cancer was in remission, she decided it was time for a celebration. And naturally, Cindy Waldron was the person she wanted to celebrate with the most. The two friends chose the Daintree Rainforest as a destination for their vacation. Located on the northeast coast of Queensland, Australia, the Daintree Rainforest consists of 460 square miles of green, luxuriant rainforest. The Daintree is also part of the oldest surviving tropical rainforest in the whole world. In fact, the Daintree is over 135 million years old. As you can imagine, there's nothing quite like it. There are some plant and animal species unique to the area. Together, the rainforest, the white sandy beaches, and the reefs in the area make for a diverse habitat. The area is popular with tourists not only for its natural beauties, but also because it offers a variety of activities. There are cruises down the Daintree River, guided hikes on exotic trails, but the area is also remote enough, perfect for quiet, relaxing celebrations and vacations. 47-year-old Leanne Mitchell and her lifelong close friend 46-year-old Cindy Waldron got together on May 29, 2016, and drove north to the Daintree Rainforest. Both women were excited about their vacation, and more than grateful that Leanne had beaten cancer. They couldn't imagine life without each other. In fact, they used to talk about becoming little old ladies together all the time. Cindy and Leanne thought they would always be together, laughing and sharing their lives as best friends. But our plans aren't guarantees. They're merely human desires to be decided by forces greater than us. Fate, some would say, or in Cindy and Leanne's case, nature. Once the two women arrived at their destination in the Daintree Rainforest, they checked into their room and started celebrating. They were happy, unaware that things would soon take a horrible turn. Cindy and Leanne decided to go for a walk. They were at Thornton Beach, one of the Daintree's many white-sanded beaches. During daylight, Thornton Beach is a perfect spot to watch the waves and marvel at Struck Island, a patch of land just off the beach. But by the time the two women started their walk, it was already really dark. Their path was illuminated by the stars and the moon, and little else. Still, the night seemed perfect. Once they hit the sand, Cindy Waldron and Leanne Mitchell started running and laughing, frolicking on the beach like they were once again little girls who shared everything. Their friendship was undying. At some point, the two women ended up on the water's edge. Cindy Waldron's back was to the vast expanse of water, while Leanne Mitchell's back was to the beach. The women were laughing, but then, in a matter of seconds, everything changed. 46-year-old Cindy Waldron cried out to her best friend, Leanne Mitchell. At first, Leanne was amused. She thought she heard her friend yelling, "It got me." Leanne immediately assumed Cindy was being melodramatic and humorous, and that her friend's reaction was caused by a piece of seaweed brushing her leg. But then it quickly became painfully obvious that Cindy was truly frightened, and for good reason. Something big and strong pulled the women into the water and dragged them out from the shore. Now terrified, Leanne extended her arms and started searching the water with her hands. The dark made it impossible for the two women to see anything. Then Leanne's heart started beating furiously, overcome by fear. She touched something cold and terrifying, something that felt an awful lot like the head of a crocodile. Gripped by panic, but also intent on saving herself and Cindy, Leanne Mitchell started punching the crocodile in the head. She punched it and hit it. She screamed at the top of her lungs and then punched the creature again. Nothing worked. The creature pulled them into the water once more. It was crazy strong. Leanne Mitchell clawed at Cindy Waldron's arm, trying to grab her friend and get both of them back to safety. But soon enough, there was nothing for her to grab. It was like her friend vanished. Cindy Waldron was gone. Leanne dived down, but she couldn't see anything. It was just too dark. The woman knew that she had to help Cindy somehow. She knew she had to get help, but all she could do was scream Cindy's name over and over again. Eventually, Leanne Mitchell made it to shore and alerted local authorities. She was taken to the hospital where she was treated for her injuries and for shock. Meanwhile, the search for Cindy Waldron started as soon as the local authorities were alerted, but everybody knew Cindy Waldron's chances of survival were low. For the next 5 days, police and SES volunteers set crocodile traps and combed the land and water around the area, but to no avail. On the 5th day of the search, the 3rd of June, rangers managed to capture a 14-foot estuarine crocodile. The animal's size and its location strongly indicated that it was the one that attacked Cindy Waldron and Leanne Mitchell. Police confirmed that human remains were found inside the animal. Estuarine crocodiles are among the most well-known animals living in the Daintree. They can do a lot of damage, and they're a real threat to unaware visitors. There are signs all over the Daintree warning people about the dangers of swimming in the croc's natural habitat. After the crocodile was captured, Cindy Waldron's father and sister made a visit to Thornton Beach to say their goodbyes and be close to where Cindy spent her final day. Mr. Waldron said Cindy would sometimes do crazy things on impulse. What she did there was a crazy thing, absolutely crazy, but that was her, he said. Anna Lee Annette, Cindy's sister, described the death as the most heartbreaking, horrendous thing to ever happen to her family. She also stated that the family thought the crocodile was not to blame. After all, the Daintree was its habitat, its hunting ground. Various reactions emerged after the attack. Some people called the attack completely avoidable and a result of human stupidity. But Cindy Waldron's friends and family were left mourning. Cindy was described as an outstanding woman and friend who had the biggest smile. Leanne Mitchell publicly spoke about the attack 2 years after it happened. She told reporters, "We would always be together, and now we're not." Henry Coetzee was a big name in the adventure community. He was born in 1975 in South Africa, and in 2010, at 35 years old, Coetzee had already garnered quite the reputation for himself. Coetzee first gained recognition back in 2004 when he led a Nile River source-to-sea expedition. This first noteworthy expedition was inspired by John Goddard, the first person to navigate the entire length of the Nile River in a kayak. Coetzee's first expedition took 4 months, but it was a controversial one. Several claims that the expedition had not begun from the true source of the Nile determined Coetzee to prove his critics wrong. In April 2005, he commenced a second leg of the expedition, a further journey from Kagera to Lake Victoria. With over 4,600 miles completed, Coetzee's first expedition was finally over and a resounding success. It was December 7, 2010, and Hendry Coetzee was leading a groundbreaking whitewater kayaking expedition from the headwaters of the White Nile and Congo rivers into the Democratic Republic of the Congo. He was joined by 32-year-old Ben Stooksbury and 24-year-old Chris Corbulic, two world-class kayakers with extensive experience. Stooksbury and Corbulic were also dedicated explorers. With primary sponsorship from Eddie Bauer Incorporated's first ascent line of outdoor gear, the three men had started their trip a few weeks before. Their purpose was clear: document the whitewater of the White Nile and Congo and development projects in the region, bring attention to the horrible clean water crisis affecting millions in the region, and, of course, be the first to boat the whitewater of the Lukuga River. Hendry Coetzee had a bit of an agenda himself. He wanted to show Stooksbury and Corbulic the beauties of the region. He wanted to take them from the snow-capped peaks into the deepest, darkest, steamiest jungle. And he wanted to show them Western media had it all wrong. This wasn't one of the most dangerous places on Earth. Instead, it was a place of immense beauty, with nice, hospitable people and breathtaking nature. The Lukuga is a tributary of the Lualaba River in the Democratic Republic of Congo, a largely unexplored river, teeming with wildlife. Hippos and crocodiles are a normal sight on the river, and Coetzee was very well aware of this. He had made sure to warn Stooksbury and Corbulic about the possible dangers of the expedition. Coetzee, who was familiar with the region, had instructed them to steer clear from eddies if they didn't want to encounter dangerous hippos wallowing underwater. Banks were also to be avoided because crocs would often sunbathe on them. Moreover, he taught his team to tap their boats to make noise. As a further precaution, the men decided to always paddle close together, in a formation that made them appear as a large animal to any potential predators. December 7, 2010 started out with a bit of an adventure on the Lukuga River. The three adventurers had just finished what was generally considered the unnavigable portion of the river. Nobody had ever made it across the portion in no sort of boat. Nobody except them. They had paddled more than 30 miles of whitewater. By then, Stooksbury and Corbulic were confident in their skills and more than used to their surroundings. The three little crocodiles they had seen on the water that day, all of them just 3 feet long, didn't scare the men. They were in formation, safe and victorious. After navigating the last stretch of the rapids, Coetzee, Stooksbury, and Corbulic faced 100 miles of flat water, a nice calm change of pace. They were in the middle of a stretch about 100 feet wide, paddling full pace in tight formation. There was thick elephant grass along the side, and the scenery was astounding. Coetzee was in the middle of the formation, with Stooksbury a little in front to his left, and Corbulic a little behind to his right. Every now and then, when they got out of sync, their paddle blades would touch. At one point, as they paddled, Corbulic glanced over to make sure they weren't paddling away or towards each other. That's when he saw it. It all happened in an instant. A huge crocodile, a terrifying creature, shot out of the water, opened its massive jaws, and clamped down on Hendry Coetzee's left shoulder. The animal's jaws were as big as the man's entire torso. There wasn't enough time to act. There wasn't enough time to do anything at all. Coetzee himself could do little else than shout, "Oh my God," before the animal pulled him under the water. His kayak was almost completely submerged. The overturned boat shook for about 20 seconds as the crocodile pulled Coetzee from the cockpit. Just like that, in the blink of an eye, Hendry Coetzee was gone, never to be seen again. Several dread-filled minutes passed. Stooksbury and Corbulic watched in silence, too stunned to move. Then the two men snapped out of their daze. They figured the animal could come back, and they knew there was nothing they could do to protect themselves if they just waited around. They had to get out of the river, and fast. The two men paddled about a mile downstream to a nearby village. As they were talking to the locals, trying their best to explain what happened, they saw Hendry's boat floating downstream. Stooksbury and Corbulic went after the kayak, just in case. But there was no sign to be found about Hendry's struggle. Once they returned to the village, the two men tried to convince the villagers to help them look for Hendry, but the villagers refused. They knew better. Hendry Coetzee was truly gone, and he wasn't the only one. This particular crocodile, a 15-foot, 2-ton beast, had already claimed the lives of 9 people. Ben Stooksbury and Chris Korbulik were devastated. They'd spent 7 weeks with Coetzee, and they both agreed this had been the strongest team they've ever been a part of. The men were evacuated by the International Rescue Committee, and now they had to make their peace. It was certainly one of the most terrifying, hurtful experiences of their lives, but at the same time, the expedition had been enlightening. Ben Stooksbury later recounted, "The unfortunate thing is the night before this happened was one of the most beautiful nights of my life. It had rained and we were all pretty happy to get cooled off by the rain. We all huddled up under the tarp on a beach and were all smiles and super happy with each other. We were overwhelmed by the place. To say that Croc came out of the blue is both literal and figurative. He took us at our happiest." The village where the 2 men stopped after the incident put out a small reward for any news or clues regarding Hendrik Coetzee, but nothing was ever found, not even a small piece of clothing. A memorial service for Coetzee was held on 28 January 2011. The only things he had were books. He didn't even own a bicycle. He never left anything behind. Wherever he went, he just showed a bit of who he was. He was always so humble and never spoke about his expeditions or accolades or achievements. He was just Hendrik. He was such a special son, and I had such a special relationship with him. He was just awesome," said Marie Neiman, Hendrik's mother. Hendrik Coetzee is still remembered as one of the greatest river explorers in recent history. "59-year-old Arthur John Becker was from Boulder, Colorado, but he had fallen in love with Costa Rica, so much so that he bought a home there and spent many years living in the beautiful Central American country. His eldest son followed him out there for a year whilst he completed his junior year of high school. More recently, though, John had returned to the States and only visited his Costa Rican home throughout the year. He remained friendly with the locals and enjoyed being part of the local community. His holiday home was situated in Tamarindo, on the Pacific coast of Costa Rica. It's popular for surfing and ecotourism, with many visitors flocking there to witness leatherback turtles crawling onto the sand to lay their eggs each year. The beaches are stunning, the surf is enticing, and the wildlife is incredible. John and his sons Joran and Avi were keen surfers, and Costa Rica offered plenty of opportunities to enjoy their hobby. John's favorite surfing spot was between Playa Tamarindo and Playa Grande. These 2 beaches are separated by an estuary. Regular passenger ferries transport people from one side of the estuary to the other, but for surfers it's just as easy to paddle across. It's not far, taking just a couple of minutes to paddle over at high tide. You can even walk across when the tide is out. John had made the paddle many times before. He and his family had been visiting that same spot for 14 years. On the 22nd of July 2016, he walked along the sandy beach with his friend Edgar Sanchez. He walked past the small yellow sign sticking out of the sand, a sign with a silhouette of a crocodile on it, but people took no notice of it. Dogs were occasionally taken by the large reptiles further upriver, but the locals often swam in the warm waters, ignoring the potential danger of crocodiles. They just didn't come that far down the river. John was almost like a local. He had lived in the area permanently for years, and now that he returned to the U.S., he made the journey back there regularly. He was well known in the town and had made friends in the community. For the last few days, John and Edgar had been heading down to the beach at dawn. As the sun came up over the horizon, bathing the sea in its warm glow, they paddled across the estuary from Playa Tamarindo to Playa Grande for a morning surf. After a couple of hours, they then headed back, paddling back across the estuary. On the 22nd of July 2016, however, something was different. A crocodile swam downstream toward the river's mouth. It was early morning, just after dawn. It was actively hunting, searching for prey, an opportunistic hunter lurking in the shallows. John and Edgar stepped into the river. It was high tide. They climbed onto their surfboards, laying face down, and paddled across the river. The predator moved closer, shielded by the reflective water's surface. It lay on the bottom of the riverbed, its eyes open, scanning the surface. This time, John and Edgar were lucky. They made it to the other side of the estuary, climbed out, and walked along the beach until they paddled back out into the open sea to beyond the breakers. They had a great time surfing, as usual, before calling it a day and heading back in. This was their routine. They thought nothing of it. When they came to paddle back across the estuary, Edgar went first. He pushed off from the shore with his feet as he glided across the river, face down on his board. John followed. But as he went to climb onto his board, he felt a sharp tug on his leg and was instantly dragged underwater. He didn't have time to take a breath. He just let out a yell of surprise and was gone. Edgar heard his cry and looked around. To his shock, he saw John's surfboard floating on the surface of the water, and no sign of John. He quickly turned his board around and paddled back to where his friend had been. There was a swirl in the water. Underneath the water, John was fighting. He could feel the full force of the crocodile's bite as it clamped down around his leg. Then it tried to perform a death roll, twisting and contorting its body around and around, trying to rip John's leg from his body, trying to disorient its prey. Then John resurfaced, kicking and thrashing about. The crocodile still had hold of his leg, but John wasn't giving in that easily. He swung himself around and punched the crocodile repeatedly on the head. He didn't stop. Over and over, he brought his fist crashing down on the reptile's armor-plated skull. He didn't think it would make a difference. With each punch, it was like hitting concrete. Surely the crocodile couldn't even feel the hits. Edgar grabbed hold of John and pulled him upwards, trying desperately to get him back onto his board. In all the commotion, the crocodile released its grip on John. He scrambled to get back on his board, but just then, terrifyingly, the crocodile's eyes and snout popped up right beside the two men, right in front of them. It hadn't finished with John yet. In a flash, it snapped its jaws at John and locked onto his head. Edgar smacked it on the nose as hard as he could. John tried to pry open the jaws, pulling with all his might. Then, mercifully, the crocodile let go. Battered and bruised, bloodied and torn, John swam to the other side of the estuary with his board. Blood trickled down his head. The lower half of his right leg hung on by just skin and muscle. The bone was broken, the muscle was torn, and his foot was twisted around at a 180-degree angle. He was in a lot of pain. He was fading fast. When he made it to the beach, he crawled out of the sea on all fours and collapsed on the sand. Beachgoers rushed to his aid. Somebody tied a tourniquet around his leg, and another raised his head, resting it on his surfboard. They called the emergency services, keeping him calm as he lay on the wet sand. Was he going to make it? Had he surfed his last surf? When the emergency services arrived an hour after the call came, John was rushed to the hospital in a private ambulance. He was pumped full of antibiotics to stave off any infection and was patched up head to toe. He received stitches to his hands, arms, face, and neck. He had broken his nose, and he lost his right leg below the knee. He was lucky to be alive. He spent a couple of days in the ICU. His two sons flew out to Costa Rica the same day as the attack and stayed by their father's side until he made a recovery. Although John didn't think his punches to the crocodile were making much difference with its hard, thick skin, his resilience is probably what made the animal release him. His son Joran said that before the attack, he and the other surfers never gave crocodiles a second thought. They knew they were in the river and that dogs were occasionally taken by them, but they assumed the crocodiles would consider humans too large for them to prey on. In more recent years, attacks are becoming more common, with 5 attacks in the past year alone. Authorities have noticed crocodiles are leaving the rivers and coming close to the beaches, closer to the tourist hotspots. How long until another strikes again? Russell Harris was a 37-year-old Brit. He had moved to Australia to work as a technical supervisor at the world's richest magnesium mine on Groote Eylandt. A quarter of the world's magnesium comes from the mine, located on the western side of the island. Situated just over 30 miles from the Northern Territory's mainland, The island is owned by the Anandiyakwa Aboriginal people. It's the fourth largest island in Australia. Russell had left the UK a few years prior to his work in Australia. Having worked for the mining company BHP Billiton for 5 months in Australia, Russell headed to Picnic Beach with Jennifer and a work friend and his partner. It was September 2005. The beach was filled with stunning golden sand. The water was crystal clear. Russell was a sporty man who loved the outdoors. He enjoyed swimming and snorkeling, something that the climate in Australia allowed him to do regularly. The two men stripped down to their swimming shorts, pulled masks and snorkels on, and waded into the water. The two of them swam together, but there was a predator heading their way. Unbeknown to the two men, a saltwater crocodile of enormous size was on the hunt in the waters. It stealthily moved closer, its nostrils and eyes just above the surface. Then it submerged beneath the sea. Underwater, its tail swished from side to side as it propelled itself forward toward the two men. Its legs were tucked into the sides of its body, its teeth clearly visible even with its mouth closed. Its eyes shielded by a membrane, its own set of goggles. When it was beneath the two men, it swam upwards, powering through the water at speed. With the two men now in imminent danger, their partners were unaware of what was about to happen. They were relaxing on the sand, enjoying the sunshine and the peace and quiet. They had been watching the two men snorkeling just 60 feet from shore, but now they looked away. At the moment of the strike, Russell's friend had dived down underwater to take a closer look at something near the bottom. He turned to look back at Russell, but he wasn't anywhere to be seen. He swam back to the surface, taking in a lungful of air, and lifted his mask onto his head. He looked around. He couldn't see Russell anywhere, so he decided to swim back in to shore. Maybe his friend had already got out. But in reality, Russell was fighting a losing battle. Nobody knows exactly what happened to him, but from the evidence later obtained, he was dragged underwater by a 15-foot crocodile, its jaws clamped firmly down and around his body. Russell would have felt the power of the bite as he turned to see what had caught him. He would have been shocked to see a crocodile in those waters. He had been told that they don't swim there. They had never been spotted on that coastline before. As the crocodile tussled with Russell, it performed a death roll, flipping Russell over and over in the water, dragging him downwards, disorienting him, and knocking the air from his lungs. Russell continued to fight back. He punched the crocodile repeatedly, scratching and scraping his arms and hands as he did so. He just couldn't get the crocodile's vice-like grip to release, and he couldn't hold his breath any longer. His lungs were bursting. He put up an incredible fight, but it was one that he could not win. When his friend walked up to the beach to the two women, he was immediately concerned not to see Russell there. Jennifer jumped up, frantic with worry. They all ran to the water, scouring the sea for any sign of him, but he was nowhere to be seen. Russell's friend couldn't understand it. 1 minute they had been swimming together, and the next, when he turned his back for a second, Russell was gone. The friends alerted the authorities, who arrived and began an extensive search for the young man. A twin-engine plane mounted an aerial search, while locals, visitors, and aborigines alike took to the water in boats to look for him. It wasn't until the next day that they found Russell's body a mile north from the beach where he had been snorkeling. It was floating in the shallow water by the mouth of a river called 8 Mile Creek. He had been badly mauled, clearly attacked, and killed by a marine animal. As the search and recovery teams moved in, they spotted a 15-foot crocodile lying in the water just yards away. This was the culprit. However, with the killing of the reptile's band, it was suggested that the crocodile was captured and relocated. Officials could tell from the injuries on Russell's body that he had put up an incredible fight with the reptile, but sadly, this hadn't been enough. Back in the UK, his mother was told of his death. At the time, it hadn't been confirmed if he had been taken by a crocodile. Before they found his mauled body, it was suspected that he had drowned while snorkeling. His mother, who had just been out shopping, collapsed in the hallway upon hearing the news. She was devastated. Her heart was broken. She was rushed to the hospital in her home county of Nottinghamshire and was heavily sedated while she was treated for shock. She was supported by her husband, who stayed by her side. When the family learned later of the devastating news that Russell had been killed by a crocodile, they waited until his mother was stronger before telling her. Hearing something like that, they thought, would likely tip her over the edge. His brother paid tribute to him, describing him as the nicest man you would ever meet. Russell was incredibly adventurous and certainly lived life to the fullest. He was very intelligent and enjoyed trying new sports such as snowboarding and water skiing. Since hunting was banned in the 1970s, there has been an explosion in crocodile populations. They were hunted close to extinction, but the bans that have now been put in place have been incredibly successful, and in some areas their numbers are gaining at about 2% year on year. In the Northern Territory alone, there are an estimated 75,000 saltwater crocodiles, which are notoriously more aggressive than their freshwater counterparts. Russell's death was the second one caused by a crocodile attack in Australia in the same month. A couple of weeks earlier, a fisherman was pulled from his boat by an enormous crocodile and never seen alive again. Following repeated incidents like this, some Australians are urging the government to bring back trophy hunting as a way to keep crocodile numbers down. Each time a deadly attack occurs, the debate about crocodile hunting starts up again. For now, the prehistoric reptiles remain a protected species. 28-year-old twin sisters Melissa and Georgia Lori were on the trip of a lifetime. They were traveling around the world, a backpacking adventure that would test them to their limits and beyond. 3 months into their journey, they traveled through Mexico. They spent some of their time volunteering in an animal sanctuary, as well as visiting some of the incredible sights that Mexico has to offer. Traveling together meant that they always had each other's back, and that's exactly what happened on the afternoon of June 6, 2021. Traveling on a budget often means you get to see more of the country. You get to experience the place more like a local. There are no fancy hotels, private car hire, or luxury day trips. For 90 pence, Melissa and Georgia jumped into a van that would take them 10 miles away from the popular resort of Puerto Escondido to Manialtepec Lagoon. They climbed out of the van at a restaurant called El Guayacan, sitting on the edge of the lagoon. It was a beautiful, still body of water, surrounded by lush vegetation and sandy beaches. This was the starting point for their organized tour, a tour that was found out later to be illegal and hosted by an illegal tour guide. They boarded a small riverboat and motored upriver amongst the mangroves away from the lagoon, away from the approved swimming spot. But the girls were oblivious to this. They had paid for their tour, and they joined a group of other tourists also keen to see the sights. As the guide moored up the boat and cut the engine, the two girls followed the rest of the group and their guide into the water. They hadn't been drinking, they weren't being foolish. They were enjoying the refreshing coolness of the lagoon and swam out into the middle of the water, away from the bank, away from the rest of the group. What they didn't know was that this body of water was also home to crocodiles. It was a nesting ground for the huge reptiles. They used the mangroves for cover. They hunted for fish, birds, and small mammals in and around the water. Beneath the surface, they lurked. The splashing of the tourists caught their attention, and after the group had been swimming for a little while, Melissa spotted something in the water, a sight that froze the blood in her veins. Her adrenaline started pumping. Her heart was thundering in her chest as she saw the head of a crocodile pop up in the water a short distance away. It began to move. It was coming towards her. Silently, its tail powered it through the water, its eyes and nostrils above the surface. She yelled out to the others in the group, warning them that there was a crocodile, and everyone began swimming as fast as they could back to dry land. But Melissa didn't make it. The crocodile opened its jaws wide and brought them crushing down around Melissa's body. She was dragged underwater. 1 second she was there, the next she was gone. Melissa screamed as she was taken under. Thoughts of her family flashed through her mind. The thought of never seeing them again. The agonizing thought of her twin having to repatriate her body back to the UK. Of her parents having to bury their daughter. She thought she was going to die. She could feel the searing pain of the crocodile's bite, the force from its powerful jaws as it held her underwater. Georgia swam desperately towards her sister with no regard for her own safety. Melissa reappeared above the surface momentarily before being dragged back below. From the intensity of the attack, Melissa lost consciousness, and the crocodile thrashed her around in the water. Her body was being thrown from side to side like a rag doll. Then it performed a death roll. Holding Melissa in its jaws, it rolled over and over in an attempt to drown its prey, disorientating it and knocking the air from its lungs. Frantically, Georgia smacked the crocodile on the face. Its hard armored skin felt like solid wood as Georgia punched it again and again, her knuckles pummeling it on the head and snout over and over. It worked. The crocodile let go of Melissa just long enough for Georgia to grab her. She pulled her towards the bank by her hair, trying to swim to safety, trying to make it out of the water. But the crocodile came back for more. It was determined to get its meal. It knew its prey was injured. It could taste the fresh blood, the scent of a meal. Georgia watched in horror as she and her sister were pursued by the crocodile, only its head above the water as it came in for another attack. She whacked it again and screamed. The commotion in the water, the screams, and the frantic paddling of Georgia were seen by other tourists. They scrambled to get out of the water, horrified as the attack unfolded. As Georgia fought off the 7-foot croc, it lunged at her. It grabbed her arm in its jaws, pulling at her, but she refused to give up. With her sister unresponsive next to her, she used her other hand to punch the crocodile on the nose. Stunned by the reaction, the crocodile released its grip. A tourist boat dashed to the girls' rescue. The crew hauled the twins aboard and assessed their injuries. Georgia had deep lacerations on her arm and hand and cuts to her legs. But Melissa was far worse. She was coughing up blood. Her body was covered in puncture wounds, but luckily she wasn't bleeding profusely. Drifting in and out of consciousness, Melissa felt the sensation of drowning from the blood building in her lungs. She had also breathed in a significant amount of water. Each time she came to, she screamed out and gasped for air. The pair was rushed to the hospital, Georgia holding her sister's hands and singing "Stand By Me" and "Three Little Birds" over and over again. Her voice soothing, calming her sister down, and keeping her focused on anything but the pain. It was all she could do. She couldn't let her sister go. They were soulmates, a special bond between twins. When the girls arrived at the hospital, they were both pumped full of antibiotics to stave off infection from both the water and the crocodile's mouth. For Melissa, it was touch and go. Doctors placed her in a medically induced coma, giving her the best chance of fighting off the infection. She had made it this far. Now she needed to hold on a little longer to allow her body to recover from her horrific ordeal. Following the attack, their river guide, thought to be a German national and unlicensed and unregistered within the tourist trade, fled. He hasn't been seen since. The twins' parents flew out to Mexico to be with their daughters. 5 days after the attack, Melissa was woken from her coma. Her breathing tubes were removed and she was able to breathe on her own. 6 months on from the attack, the two girls said that they still had nightmares about it and suffer from PTSD. They were lucky to make it out alive. Georgia did the right thing. She never gave up on her sister. She never stopped fighting for her. It could have all ended very differently, but they were there for each other. It was a terrifying animal attack. How many people can say that they survived a crocodile's death roll? Keen surfer and diver Marcus McGowan was at home in the water. He lived on Australia's Gold Coast, known for its subtropical climate and world-famous surf beaches. But it wasn't surfing or diving that nearly cost him his life on May 27, 2023. He was visiting northern Queensland with his wife and a group of friends. They took a boat out towards the Charles Hardy Islands off Queensland's northern tip. The boat slowed and came to a stop about 40 kilometers off the coast. It was a well-known diving spot, perfect for spotting some of Australia's incredible marine life. But instead of diving, this time Marcus was snorkeling. He donned his mask and snorkel and dropped into the ocean. Once everybody was in the water, the boat motored a little distance away to give them some space. It hovered nearby, the skipper relaxing whilst the group took to the water. Those in the water were men, women, and children. Marcus spoke with another snorkeler, each of them pointing out some colorful fish amongst the coral. Everyone seemed to be enjoying the wildlife haven beneath the waves, enjoying the serenity that snorkeling and diving brings. But the feeling of peacefulness came to an abrupt end. A predator singled out one of the group, an individual just meters from the next person. It swam up from the depths, its tail beating from side to side, propelling it forwards and upwards, emerging from nowhere. Marcus didn't see it coming. There was no warning, no chance for him to react or brace himself. It approached him from behind, a master of stealth and surprise. One moment he was admiring the colorful fish beneath him. The next moment, he suddenly felt something latch onto his head. He felt the piercing sensation of dozens of teeth clamping around his skull. He was sure it was a shark. He was in shark habitat. He was in shark territory. But when he lifted his hands up above his head, frantically trying to grab onto the animal and push it away, he felt its scaly skin. This was no shark. This was a saltwater crocodile, one of 100,000 that call Australia home. These huge reptiles, which can grow up to 6 meters or 20 feet in length, inhabit Australia's rivers, estuaries, and coastal seas. But it was shocking to come across one that day. An encounter like that is not something you expect to happen out in the open water while snorkeling with your friends. Crocodile attacks at sea aren't common. They are few and far between. Marcus grabbed the crocodile's jaws. He could feel the pressure building as it bit down on him. He couldn't see a thing. It was dark. He was disoriented. His mask had slipped from his face. He was battling blind. He felt for the jaws and gripped the upper jaw with one hand and the lower jaw with the other. Then, summoning all his strength, he pulled the jaws apart. He only needed to pry them open enough to pull his head out. If he could just hold his breath a little longer, if he could just open them a few centimeters, then he'd be free. Miraculously, it worked. Marcus managed to open the crocodile's jaws just enough for him to pull his head out. He jerked his head away from the fearsome teeth and gasped for air above the surface. He tried to swim away as quickly as he could, back to the boat, but the crocodile hadn't finished with him yet. Marcus didn't get a look at the reptile, but he reckoned it was a juvenile measuring 2 or 3 meters long. Even so, it was big enough and powerful enough to kill a man, and it came back for more. He watched in horror as the crocodile swam at him again, its jaws opening as it came in for the kill, trying once more to grab its prey, pull it underwater, and drown it. Others in the group saw the commotion. They saw the olive green skin and the knobbly tail as it thrashed around near the surface of the sea. They screamed, alerting the dive boat, which zoomed towards them. Marcus was treading water, waiting for the incoming bite. He needed to fight. There's no way he was going to outswim a crocodile, but if he could hold it off long enough for the dive boat to come to the rescue, then he had to give it a shot. This was his best chance. Face the crocodile head on. As the crocodile snapped at Marcus again, Marcus lashed out with his right hand. He tried to fend the animal off, pushing it away at the last second, but the crocodile snapped its jaws and bit Marcus on the hand. It didn't have a secure grip on him and immediately let go, hoping to come back for a third time and get a better purchase of its prey. Marcus cried out to the boat as the crew came in to pick the group up. When they realized what was happening, they leaned over the side of the boat and hauled Marcus aboard. The whole group made a dash for the boat. Marcus was lucky to have made it out alive. The children who were also in the group were also lucky not to have been attacked. It may have been a very different ending for any one of them. They were considerably smaller than a full-grown man and may have been a much easier target for the juvenile Salty. Blood oozed from Marcus's wounds and pooled in the bottom of the boat. He had puncture holes and cuts across his scalp, neck, and hand. One of Marcus's friends in the group was a fireman and administered first aid as the boat pelted full throttle to the nearest island. This was Hagerstone Island, 17 kilometers away from their dive site. It was an agonizing 45-minute boat ride, but Marcus was able to keep calm and focused. The team radioed ahead to plan a medical evacuation for Marcus. Speed was always key when it came to animal attacks. Loss of blood, infection, and shock were all potential killers if the victim survived the initial trauma. Once they made it to shore, Marcus was helped on to dry land. An emergency helicopter airlifted him to Thursday Island Hospital. After an initial assessment and antibiotic treatment, he was then transferred to the hospital in Cairns to patch up his deep lacerations and puncture wounds. Marcus was the fifth person to be attacked by a crocodile this year in that region. Of the previous 4 attacks, 1 was fatal. Experts have realized that more often than not, crocodiles release their victims if they put up a fight. It seems to scare them. Humans aren't their typical prey, and they won't be used to handling humans in the same way as other animals. Certainly, having their jaws pried open is not something they'd be used to. Marcus holds no grudge against the crocodile. He knew he was in its territory. It was acting on instinct. The 51-year-old said of the incident that he was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Graham Dinkelman, known to millions simply as Dingo, was more than just a wildlife handler. He was a storyteller, a protector of reptiles, and a relentless advocate for conservation. With a booming voice, an infectious laugh, and a heart for animals, he built a global following through YouTube and public appearances. He wasn't just showcasing wildlife, he was trying to save it. Whether it was educating local communities about venomous snakes or rescuing endangered reptiles, Dingo was always hands-on, often literally. But with that proximity came risk, and in the world of venomous snakes, even one small mistake can be fatal. On the afternoon of October 27, 2024, Dingo was working in KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. Reports say he was in the middle of a routine handling operation with some of the snakes in his private collection, venomous species he had cared for and showcased for years. Among them, a black mamba, one of the most feared snakes in the world. Exactly how the bite happened remains unclear, but according to sources close to the incident, Dingo had reached into an enclosure to reposition the snake, something he had done countless times before. In a flash, faster than the eye could follow, the mamba struck. The bite landed on his forearm. Witnesses say Dingo immediately realized the severity of what had happened. Black mambas are among the deadliest snakes on the planet, with venom that can kill an adult human in under 30 minutes without anti-venom. Dingo's team acted fast. Emergency services were called immediately. He was rushed to a hospital in the Hillcrest area of KwaZulu-Natal. But black mamba venom acts fast. It attacks the nervous system, causing paralysis, respiratory failure, and cardiac arrest. Without an immediate and precise dose of anti-venom, survival is rare. Despite the best efforts of paramedics and doctors, Dingo's condition deteriorated rapidly. He passed away later that night in the hospital, leaving behind his wife and children, and a grieving global audience who had grown to love the fearless snake whisperer. The black mamba, Dendroaspis polylepis, is native to sub-Saharan Africa and is widely feared for good reason. It can reach speeds of up to 12 miles per hour, is highly aggressive when cornered, and delivers a potent neurotoxic venom. Its bite can inject enough venom to kill 10 to 15 adults. Symptoms begin within minutes: blurred vision, difficulty breathing, eventual paralysis. But to professionals like Dingo, the mamba was not a monster. It was a misunderstood animal deserving respect, not fear. He always emphasized safety protocols, education, and the importance of understanding rather than demonizing these animals. Yet no matter how skilled you are, nature always has the final say. News of Dingo's death rippled across the world. Fans flooded his YouTube channel with messages of grief and admiration. Wildlife communities mourned the loss of a bold and passionate voice. Steve Irwin's name was mentioned more than once. Both men shared the same drive, to bring people face to face with the wild, not to entertain, but to inspire. In a final tragic twist of fate, both men also lost their lives doing exactly that. Dingo Dinkelman's death is a devastating loss, but his life's work continues. His message was clear. Understanding and protecting wildlife is not optional. It's essential. He showed us that education and respect are our best tools for living alongside dangerous animals. In his honor, several conservation groups are pushing for new safety training and public awareness efforts around venomous reptiles in Africa. His wife and team have vowed to continue his mission. Graham Dingo Dinkelman was more than a wildlife handler. He was a father, a husband, a conservationist, and a fearless champion for the voiceless creatures of our world. He may have been taken too soon, but his passion lives on. Snakebite fatalities are rare, especially with the right response. If you or someone near you is ever bitten by a snake, here's what to do immediately. Stay calm. The more your heart races, the faster venom spreads. Try to stay as still and calm as possible. Call emergency services immediately. Time is critical. Call emergency responders and tell them it was a snake bite. If possible, identify the type of snake, but do not try to capture it. Limit movement. Don't run or move the affected limb. Immobilize it below heart level if you can. Remove tight items. Rings, watches, or tight clothing near the bite should be removed quickly before swelling starts. Avoid applying a tourniquet or any home remedies. Monitor breathing and pulse. If the victim becomes unresponsive, perform CPR if trained. Remember, every second matters. Immediate medical attention and anti-venom are the only real treatment. Survival is highly likely if you act fast and smart. If you've been moved by this story, please subscribe for more wildlife documentaries and true survival stories.
You kiss your children goodbye as they leave for school each morning. You don't for 1 minute expect it to be the last time. But that is exactly what happened to 17-year-old Melody Chipatura's parents in Zimbabwe on January 12, 2023. Melody was a Form 6 pupil at Rushinga High School in Mashonaland. Situated in northern Zimbabwe, the region largely consists of rolling hills, river valleys, and is bordered by the Zambezi River. She was a dedicated individual who took her education seriously. Whenever there were events at the school, she would help out with the cooking and catering. She was expected to do very well in her advanced level exams, but that Thursday afternoon in January was to be her last. Not long back from the festivities of the holiday season, the students were getting back into the swing of things as the school day wore on. As was usual on Thursday afternoon, Melody and her classmates were outside playing sports. Their shouts and laughter traveled across the school playing fields. But something was drawn to the school grounds that afternoon. Perhaps vibrations through the ground of children playing. Perhaps a particular smell, promising prey nearby. It was a silent killer. One of the most feared snakes in Africa, the black mamba. So called for the black inside of its mouth, these snakes contain enough venom to kill 6 fully grown men with a single bite. They can grow up to 9 feet long. Although they are shy of humans and try to avoid conflict, they are also known to be naturally aggressive snakes, unafraid of striking if something or someone comes too close. They seem to have no fear. And although there is an anti-venom available, it is a race against time to receive treatment, as some people are dead within 45 minutes of a black mamba bite, and all within 16 hours if left untreated. A black mamba hatches from its egg with around 2 to 3 drops of venom in each of its fangs. As an adult, that increases to as much as 12 to 20 drops. However, just 2 drops of venom is enough to kill a human. But the school wasn't in typical black mamba habitat. They prefer long grass or sugarcane fields where they can hunt for small rodents and birds in the undergrowth. The school's grass was cut short. There was no overgrown brush near the school. Even so, a deadly black mamba made its way onto the school field. The loud shouting and noise coming from the sports ground must have frightened the snake inside. Silently, it slid up the concrete steps and in through the school doors. The school was quiet and calm. The snake worked its way down the corridors and into an empty classroom. The people of Zimbabwe are no strangers to the dangers of black mambas. Only 5 months before, 3 members of the same family were struck down by a black mamba in a mountainous region of the country. None of them survived. In Africa, most deaths caused by snake bites are attributed to the Cape cobra and the black mamba. Most of the time, the bites occur in the rural regions where healthcare is limited and transport can be slow. Antivenom is essential to treat the victim and is the difference between life and death. It was nearing the end of the day. Melody and the other students had finished their sports and made their way inside to their classrooms to be dismissed for the day. It was just before 4 p.m., just before home time, when Melody would walk back to her house and greet her parents like she did every day. But today was not like any other day. She didn't notice a dark gray reptile on the floor near her chair. It was lying still until its head began to rise up from the rest of its body. It could see the students piling into the classroom, and its instincts began to kick in. Its defensive and aggressive killer instincts. Melody dutifully sat down, waiting for the teacher to come in and dismiss the class. As she sat down, she felt a sharp, needle-like pain on her thigh. She looked down, and to her horror, she stared right into the face of a black mamba, its black eyes looking up at her as its head was raised 2 feet off the floor. Its mouth was agape, showing its deathly black mouth. Its tongue flicked in and out, and it hissed menacingly. Melody screamed, crying out that she had been bitten by a snake. Her fellow pupils turned to see the black mamba raised to strike again. They leapt out of the windows, screaming as they did so. Staff rushed to the scene and inspected Melody. Within 5 minutes, Melody was already on the way to Rushinga Medical Clinic. The snake was definitely a black mamba. Nobody could mistake it for anything else. Everyone knew it, and everyone knew that time was of the essence. If Melody had any chance of survival, she needed antivenom right away. The venom was now coursing through her body, working its way to the central nervous system. Her thundering heart, pounding in her chest from the panic and fear that gripped her, only accelerated the toxicity of the venom. There was nothing anybody could do to slow down the diffusion of the toxin. At first, Melody felt a tingling sensation in her thigh, where the snake had bitten her. It spread throughout her leg and into her other limbs. Very quickly, her breathing became labored, and her body began shutting down. The black mamba's venom works by affecting the transmission across the motor end plate of nerves. This stops messages from crossing from the nerves to the muscles, essentially causing paralysis. This means the muscles involved in breathing and in keeping the heart beating cease to function, and the victim dies from cardiac and/or respiratory failure. Cardiac and respiratory support can be applied to keep the victim alive while the muscles are otherwise paralyzed. Antivenom is administered intravenously, as uptake from a muscular injection is considered too slow. Melody's parents were called while she was en route to the medical clinic. She was rushed through the doors, and her parents arrived just 20 minutes after Melody had been bitten. They brought with them an herbal healer, someone they hoped could save their daughter's life. But herbs weren't going to fight off the toxicity of black mamba venom, one of the most potent toxins known to man. The local Chimhanda hospital was also called by the school, and the doctors told them to bring her there straight away, along with the snake if it had been killed successfully. Positive identification was paramount to administer the correct antidote, but Melody didn't have a chance at receiving any antivenom. She never made it to the hospital, and she died just 30 minutes after being struck in her classroom. It is still unclear exactly what the snake was doing in the school building, as the grounds were so far away from its typical habitat. There was a report that a villager had earlier spotted the snake in the local community and had attacked it. The snake then slithered off and found refuge in the relatively quiet school classroom. It was a very hot day, too, with some suggesting that the snake was seeking the coolness of the building as it sheltered from the heat outdoors. Everyone was in shock. For somebody who was so active and alert just minutes before, who was now lying deceased, was a terrible tragedy. Melody's father, Joseph Chipatura, who serves as a ZANU-PF counselor in Rushinga, said that she had high aspirations and hoped to be a psychologist one day, but it was not to be. Soon after his parents' divorce in 1998, Arslan got his first pet snake at the age of 13, and the rest, as they say, was history. One snake quickly turned into two, and from there, Arslan grew his collection. He went on to study biology at St. Petersburg National University, where he bred axolotus to fund his studies. In 2007, he secured his dream job of working at the Leningrad Zoo terrarium. He was being paid to look after the animals he had been fascinated with his entire life. And what's more, he had now met a woman who was equally fascinated with them. Arslan and Katya documented the species they owned on their YouTube channel Exotarium and created another channel together called Bobcat TV, which was about felines. Their online business was growing, but so was the pressure to keep more and more reptiles in their house to showcase to their followers. Arslan and Katya married on September 30th, 2015. It was a happy occasion, but Arslan had a dark side. Arslan's fascination with snakes became an obsession, and soon their house was filled with tanks of all sizes, housing some of the most lethal animals on the planet. With the reptiles encroaching on their own living space, coupled with Arslan's physical outbursts, Katya was gradually driven away. On August 4, 2017, Arslan accused his wife of cheating on him and hit her so hard that she suffered a concussion. He told his friends about his angry outbursts and made a public apology to her. But the damage was done, and Katya knew she had to move out. Although they both still loved each other, it was clear that she needed to get away from him. Arslan was heartbroken by the dramatic turn of events. Never in his life did he imagine the love of his life would walk out on him. But it was his fault, and he recognized that. Less than a month later, Arslan realized that life got too much for him. He decided to end it, but he opted for a dramatic exit. He flicked on the camera on his computer and reported live to their followers on their YouTube channel. He walked over to the tank, which held one of his favorite snakes, Mamba. As the name suggests, this was a black mamba, one of the deadliest snakes in the world. They can grow up to 14 feet long, shift at up to 12 miles per hour, and deliver deadly bites. Each fang can secrete 20 drops of venom, and it takes just 2 drops to kill a man. Arslan opened Mamba's tank, took a deep breath, and placed his hand inside. Known for their aggressive nature and never one to shy away from a threat, the black mamba instantly struck out. A muffled ouch could be heard on the live stream. The black mamba's fang had pierced the skin on Arslan's finger, and he walked back to his chair, sitting in front of the camera to explain to his audience what had happened. His finger began tingling almost immediately. He knew that the venom was now searing through his body, making its way to his vital organs. It was only a matter of time now, but he still had so much to say. He calmly held his finger up for all to see. 2 droplets of blood oozed from the puncture wounds. He then said, "If I die, I die." But he had a lot to get off his chest and so little time. A black mamba bite can kill within 20 minutes, and Arslan knew that. As the effects started taking over his body, he pleaded for viewers to contact Katya. He wanted to speak with her one last time. He wanted to tell her how sorry he was, and that she had his blessing to move on with another man. He stated Katya's phone number and hoped someone who was watching would get the message to her. "If someone manages to call her," he said, "if she has time to come to me and see me, I would be happy." But time was slipping away from him. His body was shutting down. He quickly wrote a message on his phone for his wife. It would be found later. It read, "I see that everything has passed for you. A new life began with someone you have long been close to." There were no betrayals. They started to date at the end of July, and I believe Katya about this. I am sincerely happy about it, but too weak not to react with stupidities. In any case, my crimes have only come back to me. Take this with humor, laugh at me, and go further. I cannot describe in words the extent of my disappointment with myself. I cannot describe the shock that I experience every day when I wake up in this new world without someone I have lost and deserve to lose, who I was with a couple of seconds ago in a dream. If it makes you feel better, it hurts, and I'm lonely. I know what to do. I have heard a lot of advice, but the feeling of emptiness and a broken life can only pass with time. Miracles do not happen. We do not live in a fairy tale. By the time he had written the message, his hands had started to seize up. They were beginning to become paralyzed. His breathing became rapid, and his bloodshot eyes began moving involuntarily, rolling backwards as he tried to clear his vision. His muscles began to shut down. It was all happening so fast, a live broadcast of a terrifying and heartbreaking suicide. The viewers were gripped, but some acted on the man's desperate pleas. Someone called the emergency services, and another contacted Katya. Pass on to Katya that I loved her very much, Arslan continued to say. In fact, I'm already dying. Farewell. I would be glad to see Katya. Damn, I'm shaking. He managed to mumble these words into the camera, perhaps showing a glimpse of regret over his decision to end his life. He had been a snake expert for 20 years, and he knew how black mamba venom worked, but to actually witness it and to feel the terrifying effects of it was shocking for Arslan. He decided at the last minute that this had all been a mistake. Instead of dying in his chair that day, he realized that he wanted to live and he needed immediate medical attention. He stood up and stumbled outside his home. His mother had heard about the broadcast and rushed to his house to see her son collapse on the sidewalk outside. An ambulance pulled up moments later and raced Arslan to the hospital, but he was in critical condition. His final wish had been to see Katya again. When her phone rang and one of the channel's viewers blurted out what had happened to her husband, she dropped everything and sped to Arslan's house. He was nowhere to be found. She realized that he must have already made it to the hospital. She arrived at the emergency department minutes later, but she was too late. Arslan had succumbed to the toxic venom. He had left it too late for medical intervention to help him. Akbar Salubiro lived in the quiet village of Salubiro, nestled in Indonesia's West Sulawesi province. He was 25, a farmer, a new father, a man just beginning his life. Like many in his village, he worked in the palm oil plantations, an industry expanding rapidly across Indonesia. The jungle was no mystery to him. He'd grown up alongside it. On the morning of March 25, 2017, he left for work. He never returned. When dusk came and Akbar wasn't home, his family became worried. By sunrise, a search party of villagers fanned out across the plantation and jungle. They expected a fall, maybe a wild animal encounter, but they found no signs, no gear, no clothes, just a trail. And then something far more disturbing. A massive reticulated python, motionless, its belly alarmingly bloated. The silence was suffocating. Then someone whispered, "He's in there." The villagers were stunned. It was unthinkable. Reticulated pythons are huge, but could they really consume a grown man? With machetes and sorrow in their eyes, they killed the snake and began cutting it open. Inside, they found Akbar, fully clothed, still wearing his rubber boots. There was no mistake. He had been swallowed whole. Reticulated pythons are the world's longest snakes, growing over 30 feet. They are constrictors, not venomous, but lethal in silence. They lie in wait, striking with blinding speed, wrapping tightly around their prey, crushing ribs, stopping the heart. Then the swallowing begins. It can take hours to ingest something the size of a human. Pythons can go weeks, even months without feeding again, but during digestion, they are vulnerable, bloated, sluggish, and exposed. In Akbar's case, experts believe the python struck from above or behind, possibly from a tree or while camouflaged in brush. The attack was likely over in seconds. Cases like this are extremely rare, only a few confirmed in all of recorded history. But scientists warn they may become more common. As palm plantations expand, jungles shrink, and as natural prey disappears, apex predators like pythons are forced to take risks. Monkeys, pigs, and small deer are usual targets, but when hunger meets opportunity, even humans can become prey. Akbar's small frame and isolated location may have tragically made him the perfect target. News of Akbar's death spread worldwide. Photos of the python and the grim recovery went viral. Shock turned to fear, and fear to fascination. How could this happen? Could it happen again? In 2018, it did. Another villager, Watiba, a 54-year-old woman, was swallowed by a python in southeast Sulawesi, just over a year after Akbar. Same region, same species, same horrifying end. These were not random incidents. They were signs of a deeper crisis. Akbar's village mourned deeply. His wife was left to raise their son alone. The jungle that had once been their home now felt hostile. Some refused to work near the forest. Others demanded government action. But nothing could bring him back. Only questions remained. Could this have been prevented, or was it simply nature reminding us who still rules the wild? Akbar's story is not just tragedy, it's a cautionary tale. As humans destroy habitats for profit, the balance between man and nature crumbles. We must ask, how much wilderness are we willing to lose? What will it cost us? Because when forests fall, ancient predators don't disappear. They adapt, and sometimes they strike back. Akbar Salubiro's story is one of the most horrifying and rare encounters in history. Michael Peterman joined the Dayton Fire Department in his early 30s after having had a revelation. He was sick of going from one meaningless job to another. Since he could remember, he had an inclination to help people. He was reliable, dedicated, and brave, so the only logical option was to become a firefighter. Peterman quickly established himself as one of the most hardworking firefighters in the station. No one could question his work ethic and devotion to helping the people of Dayton, Ohio. He had the fire department's core values embedded in his soul: pride, courage, commitment, discipline, and service. Throughout his career, Michael participated in numerous rescue operations, battling fires and responding to emergencies of all kinds. His ability to remain calm under pressure and his quick decision-making skills were invaluable assets in the field. Peterman's leadership qualities did not go unnoticed. He mentored younger firefighters, sharing his knowledge and experience with the next generation. But something else that defined Michael, aside from his 14 years spent at the fire department, was his affinity for reptiles and snakes. From a very young age, he was fascinated by snakes and lizards, and this interest grew into a lifelong hobby. As soon as he could afford to take care of his slithering pets, Michael transformed his home into a mini sanctuary, housing a variety of snakes and lizards. Among his collection of snakes, there were also a few venomous ones that he cared for deeply. They were special beings. Their patterns and distinctive features fascinated him to the point that he would spend hours just looking at them. His passion for reptiles developed into a side gig. People in his community who knew of his personal collection would often call him to deal with unwanted reptiles. He quickly learned the do's and don'ts of handling snakes in order to ensure the safety of both the animals and the people involved. In one particular case, when Michael was off duty on July 31, 1998, someone called him begging for help with a python found under a truck parked on Warren Street, just down the street from Company 11. He immediately got into his car and informed his colleagues of the python's presence at the same time. When they arrived at the scene, the firefighters carefully picked up the snake and placed it in a 55-gallon trash can. Michael checked the snake for any signs of distress or injuries. He concluded that the python was healthy and well fed, probably someone's pet that escaped its cage. So, as you might have noticed, Michael was not an amateur. However, his vast experience and knowledge of snakes were no help when one of his most venomous pets attacked him. 21 years ago, on August 3, 2003, Michael was at his home, enjoying his evening. The next day, he was supposed to go to work, so he knew there were a couple of things to prepare. As the meticulous man he was, he ironed his uniform to perfection and hung it on the closet door. But before he could go to bed, he had to feed his pets. He swiftly placed the food into the non-venomous pets' cages and then moved on to the venomous ones. Here he had to use some special instruments. Michael was well aware of the potential risks involved when he fed his venomous snakes, so he always took precautions. He usually used snake tongs to place the food in the enclosures, never actually getting his exposed hand near the snakes for fear of direct contact and possible snake bites. As he reached the Central African rhinoceros viper's cage, he took a brief pause to prepare the food. This particular snake, known for its striking appearance and potent venom, was one of the more dangerous species in his collection. The Central African rhinoceros viper is a spectacular snake, notable for the horn-like scales above its nostrils, which give it its name. Native to the tropical forests of Central and West Africa, these snakes can grow up to 4 feet in length. They are less aggressive than some of their relatives, such as the Gaboon viper, but are still capable of delivering a deadly bite. While the rhino viper is not typically aggressive, it can strike quickly if it feels threatened or is hungry. Its potent venom and long fangs make it a formidable predator. Interestingly, when agitated, the rhino viper can inflate its body to nearly double its size, a behavior likely meant to intimidate potential threats. On that fateful Sunday night, a second of negligence cost Michael his own life. While placing the snake's food inside its enclosure, he accidentally bumped the cage. Although he knew all the safety protocols he absolutely had to follow when being near a venomous snake, he still hit the cage with the snake tongs. This seemingly insignificant action startled the snake, which was already on high alert due to the presence of food. The viper, now agitated, perceived the man's hand as a threat. Without a second to react and retract the tongs to close the cage door, the snake struck his hand with alarming speed. The attack was swift and brutal. The rhino viper's long fangs sank deep into Peterman's hand, delivering a dangerous dose of venom. For Peterman, the effects of the venom were immediate and devastating. Somehow, Michael managed to close the cage door and ran upstairs to the closest phone. His condition was quickly declining, but he knew he had to call for help. He refused to die like this. Emergency services arrived just a few minutes later at his home. The responders offered first aid help and prepared him for transportation to the University of Cincinnati Hospital. Immediately after arriving at the hospital, the doctors called Tim Harrison, an Oakwood police officer who founded the group Outreach for Animals to rescue exotic animals and educate the public about them. He correctly identified the snake that bit Michael and was tasked with taking care of it. Harrison removed the snake and transported it to Heaven's Corner Zoo for endangered animals in West Alexandria, Ohio. Back at the hospital, the medical team worked tirelessly to stabilize Peterman, but the venom's effects were relentless. Peterman's body was in a state of shock. The venom of the rhino viper attacked Michael's circulatory system. It caused extensive tissue damage and eventually led to severe internal bleeding. But the medical team at the University of Cincinnati Hospital faced another challenge. The antivenom Michael required for his rhino viper bite is extremely rare and difficult to obtain in the United States. Numerous phone calls were made to different hospitals in the country, but not a single one confirmed they had the antivenom. Eventually, after a frantic search, Michael's doctors found the antivenom at a hospital in Miami-Dade County, Florida. Michael's only job was to stay alive, just in time for it to arrive. The time required to transport it to Cincinnati proved too long, however. Michael was pronounced dead at 3:17 p.m. the following Monday, just minutes before the antivenom reached the hospital. His family, friends, and colleagues at the Dayton Fire Department were in shock. In the 14 years that Michael served the Dayton community as one of his firefighters, he never showed a moment of carelessness. He was always prepared, and sometimes too cautious. But at the end of the day, his death was simply a terrifying accident. Although beautiful and fascinating, these creatures are also incredibly dangerous, especially when hungry.